I see her on too.
Well, I think
So
that
giving
we
the oath.
don't quite have all of our board members here, right?
Right. I think we have the few that are getting sworn in quickly. Actually, we're waiting for one more person. Sorry, I'm looking at my list too. Okay, Secretary Richardson, give us like 2 more minutes of your time. We're just waiting for one other person who's going to get sworn in to join the Zoom as well.
No problem, Sydney. Just let me know when you have all three and we'll get started.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, one of the folks that are being sworn in is getting ready to call in right now. There was a little bit of a mix-up. So thank you everyone for your patience. Okay, Just real quick, Javier Romero, are you on? I can't see him on.
I
the
am.
participant list. Oh, perfect. Okay. Perfect. So I think we have everyone who needs to be sworn in on the line. So everyone, if you're on the line, then you need to be sworn in. Can you please turn on your camera, and then Secretary Richardson will go ahead and administer the oath.
Can we also have the three folks that are getting sworn in also take yourself off mute so we can actually hear you say the oath? Thank you. Sydney, does it look like we're ready to go?
Yes, we are ready. Thank you so much.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. This will make this very easy on you. What I'll need you to do is repeat after me. So let's get started. I, please say your first and last name. I
Javier Romero, Secretary.
do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will bear true faith
I will bear true faith
and allegiance to
and allegiance to
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California.
that I take this obligation freely
I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully
I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
that I'm about to enter.
Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Secretary Richardson. Amy, did you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure, sounds good. So we go to slide 3, please. So good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to our Cradle-to-Career Governing Board meeting. So welcome governing board members and members of the public. We're so glad that you're here today. Also, welcome to Tuesday. For those of us that are into numbers, you know, it's kind of cool when, you know, the numbers all line up. And I don't think that we're supposed to see twos like this on the calendar on a Tuesday for quite some time. So anyway, when we first started with the Cradle-to-Career planning work group, this little thing called the pandemic did not exist. You know, and this is, I think, such really important work, and we kind of pushed on. We were lucky then to have connected with each other in person in the governor's meeting room there, and that really helped us to build these relationships that were needed to support continuing to work in a virtual environment. And so here we are today. You know, the board, we've added a number of new partners, and my hope is that we'll continue to build those relationships. We can talk about how this is just, you know, 4 quarterly meetings a year for us to provide oversight and leadership to the Office of Cradle-to-Career. But I think, you know, for a lot of us, it's more important than that. You know, we're at a place in our careers where the work that we're doing is consequential. And, you know, now with much of the planning behind us, acting and really leaning into that can help us pivot and make that data system a reality in service to all Californians. It's a remarkable time and opportunity for us to do something meaningful together. We have this way of educating children and adults before the pandemic, and coming out of that, you know, moving into, you know, more of an endemic situation, we know that there's change. There has to be change. The state budget, for example, is changing how we think about K-12 and pulling in TK to that conversation. And so this is an exciting time where we can look at the data to continue to shape and and evolve and improve what we can do for the state of California, for its people. I believe that the STATA system is really integral to all of that. So we want to really recognize all of you, everyone who is stepping up, stepping forward to engage and helping us to bring the Cradle to Career system to life and fully leveraging it all for, for all Californians. And so thank you for being here. We've got a great agenda ahead of us today, one that I think will help us get started on a number of fronts and moving forward with Cradle to Career. We are in a virtual setting today, as you know. While I'm excited to cover all of the items in the agenda today, we all recognize Zoom fatigue can be a thing. So while we have a couple of breaks planned, I'd love for you all to be mindful of your individual needs and to take breaks and stand up and stretch as needed throughout the day. So for our agenda, one of the things that you'll notice today is that our slides, we've categorized our agenda items. I for informational, D for demonstration or discussion type items, and V for when we will be taking a vote. So we hope this is helpful. Agenda review. So during today's meeting, we will hear from our new Executive Director, Marianne Bates. We have a demo on CCGI, 2 informational items in the morning on the Teacher Retention and Training Dashboard and the Advisory Board application process, and then 2 votes in the afternoon on the Governance Manual and the Conflict of Interest Policy. And so we'd like to get all of the items in and make sure that we're moving the agenda along so that we'll be able to get to those votes. Since we're going to be taking some votes today, I'd love for Kathy to share the agreement scale that was so helpful to the Cradle to Career work group and its planning process.
Thank you, Amy. So when we were trying to go through all of the different complex ideas that were investigated during the planning process, we realized it was helpful not to turn decisions into a binary of a simple yes or no. And that if we left this option called yes with reservations, it often helped surface issues that maybe hadn't come all the way to the forefront during a discussion. And so the idea is when it's time for a vote, each person would get to choose. If they were feeling like everything was just as it needed to be, they could say yes, so they could agree. If they were very concerned, they could say they disagreed. And in between, if in spirit, it felt about right, but maybe there was some aspect of it that needed a little bit of tweaking, they could vote yes with reservations. And each person who either was voting yes with reservations or disagree were invited to share the rationale for not agreeing. And what was helpful about that is sometimes there would be something that someone would raise in that reservation section that would lead another member of the planning group to say, you know what, I'm actually a little bit worried about that too. And we could go back and we could rework the proposal a little bit until it got to something that achieved true consensus. And so one of the things that I think that's important to remember about the concept of consensus is that it's not that everybody gets exactly what they want. It's that everybody can live with something that they think is going to be in the best good for the California people. And so that's the process we want to continue to use now that we're moving into the governing board section.
Great, thanks, Kathy. So at this time, we'll go ahead and welcome Marianne Bates, Executive Director for Office of Cradle to Career, to our meeting. She and her leadership will be central to moving forward with the implementation of the system, and she has a few remarks for us.
Thank you so much, Amy. I want to start by thanking all of you on the governing board for the warm welcome. I came on board officially February 1st, as you know, and I've really enjoyed the kind welcome here at GovOps and from so many of you over the last 3 weeks. And as I've gotten to meet with many of you on the board, I've been inspired to hear why each of you has decided to invest your scarce time and energy into our collective efforts to build the Cradle to Career system. So as I've listened to your personal and professional stories, and as I've reflected on why I was excited to join CTC, so much of it points back to our vision and why we're here. So I thought it might be helpful for us to kind of reflect on this as we start the day. The Cradle to Career system seeks to foster evidence-based decision-making to help Californians build more equitable futures and empower individuals to reach their full potential. After drinking from a fire hose here the last few weeks, I found it helpful to return to this vision statement and remind myself that each of the tactical steps that we aim to move forward in the coming months really needs to tie back to that vision statement, right? It's about evidence-informed decision-making, it's about equitable futures, and it's about empowering all Californians to reach their full potential. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes walking you through a few key priorities that we have for this year. And the first set of these priorities relates to 3 groups of people. So one major and early priority for me, as you might expect, is building out the C2C team. And in a minute, I'll walk you through the org chart for that and let you know where we're hiring and where we are in hiring and building. But an early priority is spending time building really effective working relationships with the team members who are already on board, working on information management, setting specific targets for our work, and ensuring that we're working really effectively and cohesively. In addition to hiring a number of new positions and kind of integrating them into the team. So the second important group of people is all of you, right? The governing board. And the key priority for me is ensuring that you have the information from the C2C team to be able to provide guidance as a cohesive, focused board and take effective decisions on this high-level direction that you provide to the C2C office. And then the third group, that's a major priority, is the advisory boards. We have the advisory board on data and tools. We have the community engagement advisory board, and these will be a really important mechanism for continuing the work with communities that was started during the planning process. And as Amy mentioned, we'll be talking about these advisory boards more today. So all 3 of these groups are going to need to work together effectively for us to build the C2C office's work and achieve our vision together. And so doing the work to ensure we can do that well is a huge priority here at the beginning. So let me walk you through a little more detail on where we are with building the C2C team. So this is a draft org chart. You can see where we're at. The check marks indicate people who are already on board. So we currently have 6 team members on board. And let me just walk you through where we sit. So in addition to myself as the executive director, in our operations team, we have Zishan and Daniela. Daniela is currently managing my calendar, so I just thought I'd mention that for those of you who are looking to meet with me. And in legal, we have Ron on board. I think almost all of you have already met him in prior meetings. And data infrastructure, we have Dan. And I wanted to also, Sydney, if you're open to it, give you the mic for just a minute to introduce yourself. Sydney is our board liaison and has been and will continue to be working closely with all of you on the governing board.
Yes, hi, thank you so much, Marianne. Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Armendariz. Like Marianne said, I am the C2C board liaison. I've had the pleasure of meeting, I think all of you back in November, and then also personally in our meet and greets with each of you. So I won't go into my autobiography or anything like that, but my primary role is to pretty much manage the governing board and the 2 advisory boards and serve as your point of contact for C2C. So if there's anything you need moving forward, please reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to assist you. And I just look forward to working on this project. It seems like an awesome opportunity for us to bring California together with local government, state government, and also provide some awesome tools for students to be able to reach their potential. So I'm just really excited to be a part of the team and happy to see you all again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. We're really fortunate to have Sydney's depth of experience across many state agencies and her leadership and experience in working directly with different communities across the state on the team. So we're excited to have her on board. One thing I wanted to flag is that we will be hiring a number of key positions soon. So you can see in green are positions that are penciled in for year 1 staff. So this includes positions related to data infrastructure, supporting and developing the research and public tools, as well as community engagement. So I just wanted to mention that I'm happy to forward the job postings once they are live and would really welcome your support in amplifying the job postings and ensuring that they reach a wide range of people. I'll also just mention to the public, to those of you who are dialing in and listening in on this meeting, really welcome you to also share these job postings, to apply for the job postings. I would love to have your engagement with that. So the next set of priorities, so I'm walking through 6, we talked about the 3 groups of people and now talking about priorities as they relate to our work. And I thought it'd be helpful to organize these according to the kind of three legs of the stool of C2C's work. So in green, you can see the analytical data system, the data on education and job outcomes, working to build that. So where one of the major priorities is procurement for the components of the data warehouse. And just to give you an update on where we are for that, as part of the procurement process for the analytical data system, we go through what's known as a project approval process, or PAL, with the California Department of Technology. So this consists of 4 stages, and we've submitted what's known as their stage 2 documents and assessing alternatives, and are already working on the next stage, which includes developing the various procurement documents. So we're moving forward with this, happy to keep you up to date on our process there. Another major priority will be to finalize the overarching legal agreements, like the participation agreement that will enable us to move forward with this work. So that's another major priority for us in these early months. The second area of our work, if you look in orange here to the left, the lower left, we have the operational tools. So the tools to support college planning and transition. And a key early priority there is to scale the CCGI services, the California Colleges.edu services. And I'm excited that we'll be hearing from CCGI today in today's meeting, and we'll be learning much more about their work later in the agenda. And then the third area is about community engagement. You can see it in the lower right in purple, training and outreach, continuing to engage communities early and often. And a key priority there early on will be to seat the 2 advisory boards and ensuring that we have wide representation on these 2 boards that can really inform all of the work that we're doing here from an early stage as we get started. So in sum, our key priorities are building out the C2C team, remainder of the hires, working effectively with you as a governing board, seating these advisory boards, working through the next steps on building the analytical data system and scaling the tools for students and families. So it's an honor to work with all of you. I'm really thrilled to be on board and happy to turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So before we dive into our agenda today and get on with board business, this is time for us to invite public comment. So please contact Virgil Balthazar if you would like to make a comment of up to 2 minutes. And we'll pause here to see if Virgil, anybody has stepped forward.
At the moment, no one has contacted me about public comment yet.
Let's go ahead and wait a couple minutes. It's a good time to stretch if you're in need of a stretch. Grab a sip of coffee or something like that.
We have public comment from Angela Perry.
Hello, my name is Angela Perry, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Institute for College Access and Success. I just sincerely wanted to express thanks for those updates. Thank you so much, Marianne. And really want to express TCAS's enthusiasm, excitement about all of the progress that the Cradle-to-Career data system is making. We really support all of these endeavors and have been really enthusiastic at every step of the way, and really look forward to all that the data system will allow California to accomplish. We look forward to hearing more of the updates throughout the day, and especially hearing more about the advisory boards. I did want to express that TCAS really hopes to have the opportunity to support the data system in any way. And if that ends up being advisory board membership, we would be very happy to support the data system that way. But however possible, we really just wanted to express support and enthusiasm and appreciation. So thank you so much. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do.
Thank you so much, Angela. And Rachel, do we have any other interested in stepping forward?
At the moment, no one else.
Okay, we'll give it 1 more minute. All right, anybody else? Michelle?
Anyone else?
Okay, I think we can go ahead and move on. So over the course of the planning process, one key theme that surfaced across multiple discussions was this opportunity to bring effective tools to scale that can improve opportunity and educational access for California's youth. So in the enacted legislation, I believe it's Ed Code 10856D that specifically requires us to build upon existing data systems. So that's why I'm excited to hear and to have this opportunity to hear from CCGI this morning. We've heard from many of you out there in the public about how much you value public-facing tools, and the Cradle-to-Career team will scale and be able to reach many more young people in California and hopefully open up the college pathway to them. So scaling CCGI to be statewide will be, I think, a really important early win for our work here together. So I'd like to introduce Tessa Carmen DeRoy from CCGI, and she'll provide about a 60-minute overview of what that scaling looks like with some opportunities for Q&A.
Thanks so much, Amy. Good morning, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to share our work with you today. Just let me share my screen and we'll get started. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen, please?
Yep,
Awesome.
we can see it.
Excellent. I know I have several co-presenters with me here this morning. And I'll introduce you guys as we go. I wanted to get started by just giving you a very basic overview. So some of you have spent endless hours talking with us, working with us over time, and some of you have never heard of us before. So we're going to start with a really high-level overview in the hopes of sort of bringing everyone along in the process. So we are a nonprofit equity-focused initiative that was founded in 2013, and at that time took over management of an existing state platform called CaliforniaColleges.edu. California Colleges was actually founded collaboratively in 2000 amongst all of the educational segments, because a lot of the needs that we are seeking to address now are needs that have been long recognized. We have three overarching goals that aligned really well with what the planning process surfaced as needs for California students, parents, and educators. So we want all seniors in the state to graduate with some sort of a plan for life after high school. We seek to simplify and streamline the college and financial aid application processes. And we provide K-12 educators and post-secondary systems with the data that they need to make timely and accurate decisions in real time, right? That impact forward-moving trajectories for students, not retrospective sort of analytical data. So that's the key distinction between the analytical tools and the operational tools. We currently partner with a good chunk of, there are about 3.4 million students across the state who sort of fall into our target population. And currently we're serving 700,000 of them. By the fall, there are an additional 300,000 students that are in the districts that we're expanding to presently. So we still have quite a ways to go, but we have a good starting point for moving this work forward. And we essentially do four things. So we manage CaliforniaColleges.edu, which offers college and career planning tools, as well as lessons. We therefore have to provide training and user support to the students, educators, and parents across the state who make use of the tools. There's been some discussion during the planning process of data accuracy, and in particular A through G data, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, and how complicated that actually can be. So we have a team who works specifically with K-12 data teams to help, and also educational services teams to help them align their data to the source of truth database for A through G coursework, which we'll talk about as well today. And then we provide a secure method for matching identifiers and moving transcript data. So basically, we connect accounts between California colleges and receiving systems, and then students' transcript data can be moved over or other forms of data as useful. So Rather than describe our approach for you or demo the tools, I was going to show you a brief video that lays out sort of the overarching path for how these tools can support both students and the frontline educators that are supporting them. And then we'll move on to actual real life people talking about that. But here we go.
Back when I was a freshman, I never would have believed I'd have so many choices. School seemed like that conveyor belt at the grocery store checkout. In college, that never seemed like an option at all.
When I asked Javier what he wanted to do, he shrugged. But when I asked what he enjoyed doing, he really opened up. Javier didn't see how his interest connected to jobs. So I walked him through a career assessment on californiacolleges.edu.
My dad's a mechanic, and I've always loved seeing how things work. The career assessment came back with jobs I'd never even thought of: electrician, aircraft technician, even mechanical engineer.
Javier spent a lot of time on the career search tool, researching what these jobs involved, what they paid, and what kind of education or training he'd need to get them.
They all needed more than just a high school diploma. To be a mechanical engineer, my best bet is a bachelor's degree, while an associate's degree could really help in becoming an aircraft technician. To be an electrician, I'd need to get certification.
Javier needed to find schools with specific programs, and he needed them to be affordable and close to home. The major search tool let him put in programs of study, then find colleges that offered them. He found 3 nearby. LA Trade Tech provides an electrician certification program. West LA College has an AS in aviation maintenance, and Cal State Northridge offers a BS in mechanical engineering.
All these schools require different things. If I wanted to be eligible for CSU, I'd have to meet A through G requirements. That meant passing a bunch of high school classes in different subjects, along with having the right GPA. I was already a junior, and I was worried I was way behind.
Calculating A through G eligibility by hand is confusing, but because the CSU and UC eligibility tools connect to Javier's actual transcript, figuring it out was a snap. I ran a report and found that Javier was just 2 units off track for CSU.
Ms. Hill helped me find a summer English course to get caught up, and I was able to test out a Spanish too. I even used the academic planner to plot out all my senior year courses.
Javier applied to 3 schools. Since he used his californiacolleges.edu account to apply, I could track when each application was submitted.
The CSU application was the most intimidating because I had to enter all my A through G courses. What if I left something off or got a course name wrong? It turned out to be a breeze. californiacolleges.edu let me automatically import my A through G courses right from my account. It took 30 seconds, and it made sure I didn't make any mistakes that could hurt my eligibility.
Because californiacolleges.edu automatically passed along his transcript data with his CCC apply applications, LA Trade Tech and West LA College had the information they needed to properly place him in first-year English and math.
Applying was one thing. Figuring out how to pay for college was something else.
When I ran the financial aid application report, I could see Javier hadn't submitted a FAFSA or California Dream Act application. I wanted him to know there was financial aid out there for him.
No one in my family had ever gone to college, so I had no idea how paying for it worked. Ms. Hill pointed me to the financial aid lessons, which took me step by step through how financial aid worked and how to apply. Turned out I was eligible for a whole bunch of free grants and work study too.
Javier launched his financial aid application through his californiacolleges.edu account. That let us both track when it was submitted and whether the school had sent his GPA.
March and April were like a dream come true. I got admitted to Northridge and got confirmation of my financial aid options at all 3 colleges.
There's nothing better than seeing a student succeed at something they thought was impossible. Javier ran into the office and pulled the acceptance and financial aid emails up on his phone. He said, "Can you believe I got into college?" I said, "Yes, I can."
4 years ago, I felt like I was on a conveyor belt, like I didn't have any choices at all. Suddenly, I've got 3 amazing career options that I think I'd really love, and 3 great colleges to choose from. Now comes the hard part, deciding what I want my future to be. It is a tough choice, but it's a great one because I'm the one gets to make it. Back when I was a freshman, I never would have believed that.
All right. So that is what we all want to see for every student in the state of California. And in some districts across the state where there's very systematic implementation, these tools have actually definitely facilitated that kind of systematic approach to ensuring that students have support and information sort of centralized in this one-stop platform, and that the educators have the data that they need, the reporting they need to know when they need to intervene, and how best to guide students. But the reality on the ground is actually quite challenging, right? The recommended counseling ratio is 250 to 1. Our state has 622 students per counselor. Counselors have a hard time getting face time with students. They're not always dedicated to college and career planning because they're also dealing with mental health issues and other related counseling priorities. And in addition to which, many of them have never been trained in college and career planning, or college planning specifically. So the point of this infrastructure is to try and create, the point of California colleges is to try and create a sort of uniform infrastructure that people can tap into to help support students and create that baseline for all students in the state. I wanted to talk for a minute about the financial aid lessons that we released this last fall. So perhaps the most confusing part of the college and college planning and transition process is around financial aid. We had set out we learned a lot in the first several years of implementing these tools with school districts across the state. And one of the things we learned is that because of the lack of face time, because of the ratios, because of all these things, it actually made a lot of sense to try and create somewhat more self-guided lessons for students, something that anybody in any classroom setting, be it a sub, be it a college counselor, be it a math teacher, could plug them into a set of tools that would help walk them through a significant part of the content that they needed to understand. And so we spent a year redesigning the financial aid dimension of californiacolleges.edu, which the timing of which has been really great, given the forthcoming legislature, the forthcoming need for districts to be able to ensure that all students launch their FAFSA or their CADA prior to graduation. But rather than my talking about them and showing them to you, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And I'm going to ask Ana Castillo if she can come unmute herself. Ana is a senior at Heritage High School, and we met her, I don't know, a month and a half ago during some focus groups that we were providing, or we were holding with students to get feedback on both the financial aid lessons and the functionality on California colleges more broadly. So Ana, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your experience using the platform?
Hi everyone, my name is Ana Castillo. I'm a senior at Heritage High School in the Paris Union High School District. I learned about California Colleges EDU my freshman year, so about 4 years ago, 2018. And I learned about it through my college and career class at Heritage. And the website or infrastructure really helped me figure out and develop a relatively easy plan for colleges and try to figure out what I wanted for my career in life. And I always knew that I wanted to go into medicine, but I wasn't really sure what I could major in, what I would major in, or what I really liked about medicine. So the career assessments at California EDU really helped me narrow it down to my focus that I applied to colleges with, which is microbiology. And with that focus, I've been accepted into a few colleges already. So I'm really grateful that, thank you. I'm really grateful that California Colleges EDU was able to push me and put me right on track to, choosing what I really liked through the career assessments. So I'm going to show you and share my screen, and I'm going to show you my financial aid lessons on California EDU, California Colleges EDU. It doesn't allow me to screen share.
Hold tight, someone can fix that, I'm sure.
So the financial aid lessons really helped me figure out how I could actually go to college. since I am the first person in my family to go to college in this country. So, let me see.
You able to share now?
No.
Hi, Joel, or someone possible to give Anna access?
Give me 1 second.
Thanks.
Okay, she should be able to share screen now.
Got it.
There you go. It's coming up. Anna, you're muted.
It said that when I'm sharing the screen, my computer audio is disabled.
Okay. Why don't I share screen and then let me pull up, actually, give me a second. I'll pull up the tools. It's going to take me a minute. And then you can walk folks through them. Give me 1 sec.
Okay, so obviously if I were to show my account, I would be signed in, but if you scroll all the way down.
Hold on, let me scroll into a demo account. Okay.
So if you scroll all the way down and go to my financial aid plan, it has an entire checklist that is organized by month of your senior year of how you can get through your entire financial aid plan. Mine is pretty much decked out and pretty completed because I've been using it every month. So mine shows completed for all of the months up until February, which is the month that we're in now, because I've been going through it every month and actually doing all of the tasks. But I am still in the process of completing all of the modules all the way through May. So next month, I'll just continue the lessons that are provided for me and start checking off whatever I need to check off. So it tells you the time it will take to complete a lesson. As you can see, it says the completed to-dos. Whenever you go through the lesson, you go through the slides, you actually read it. At the top, it tells you 12 minutes, which for me is something that I was really happy about, because when I was first learning about the whole financial aid process, I was like, I wonder how long this is going to take. So to know that each slide took, about 12 minutes, 6 minutes, it felt like it wasn't that big of a task. So I was like, oh, okay, if I can do this in 12 minutes, I'll do it during this break, or I'll do it between this class, so it helped me kind of shove it into my schedule when I thought that I didn't have any time to do it. So you go through the slides, and the slides help break down a lot of things. For example, it gives you definitions of words that you might not know, like independent student, dependent student. That was something that I did not know personally. So the fact that it gives you definitions and it explains what's a legal parent, it has also FAQs, which is like, if I ever come up with a question that I think, oh, maybe somebody else might have thought of it, but they never asked it, it could be in the FAQs. If anything, you can just go ask your counselor anything. So once you go to the next slide, it keeps, just organizing, and then whichever one you want to fill out, you click. And then once you get to the conclusion, it tells you what to do for that month and how you can prepare early on for next month. And once you go through the slides, you start doing actually the to-do list and going through those. Once you finish something,
Sorry.
Yeah, there's that one.
Can you tell you when we spoke the other day, you were sharing with me about how you helped your dad use these tools with you?
Oh, yeah. So my dad had filled out FAFSA a long time ago because of my stepbrother. So he was really just, new to this basically. And when I told him about it, he was really confused and he was like, well, I don't know how I can fill this out because we needed his information to actually fill out my FAFSA. And so with the slides and the presentations and the checklists, it really helped me narrow it down for him so that he could understand it a lot more than even I could sometimes, because when I would show him something on the slides, he would understand it right away and I would be like, what is that? So it definitely helped out with my family. And even, I speak Spanish and my mom only speaks Spanish, so I have to translate everything over to her. So the slides being like really broken down easily made it a lot easier for me to translate it over to my mom, which was also helpful. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing your experience. I suspect people may have questions for you, so if you want to stick around for a bit, that would be really great. I'm going to go ahead and show a quick video that we pulled together from some conversations we've been having with our colleagues in districts across the state as we try and talk with them a bit about how they're utilizing these lessons and how they're going to handle implementation of the universal FAFSA requirement.
I was very excited to see the financial aid lessons. This is already created. There's nothing we have to do in addition to it. It's a built-in user-friendly system.
I was able to click on it with the students. We did it together. We did those first 2 modules, which took 20 minutes. With questions and answers.
Our students often comment, that was easy. And that's really the best commentary that we could get. We want them to feel like, wow, you know what? That was every bit as smooth as I hoped it would be.
We don't have to create separate materials. There's already videos on there. And so it saves that classroom component and instruction.
The financial aid plan takes them to the steps that they can do. And the to-dos was really nice because the kids actually clicked on there. Okay, I did that. Okay, you can't click it if you haven't done it.
You're not searching around saying, okay, I got to go to this website. Let's go to FAFSA.gov. We're in one central place with all of the essential pieces and all of it linked together.
I think that's a huge benefit. The lessons are already built in and they're self-paced and it's intuitive for the students.
Everybody says it was really clear, to the point, that it made sense. And it was their language. It wasn't too wordy. It was specific, which made sense for the students.
The financial aid tools really support counselors and make their jobs easier by putting everything into one centralized place.
This has a lot of potential for us, especially with the FAFSA or the DREAM Act mandates that everyone has to complete.
The reports are easier too. I pull reports every week. I think it was super easy. I didn't even get trained this year.
We can run regular reports to drill down and see where our students are in the process. I can now click on a specific student and get specific information on just that one kid.
It saves counselors a lot of time, which of course is always going to be a benefit to our very, very busy site counselors.
I have 520 students on my caseload. So I have 100 and something per grade. It just made it so much easier, I'm just so glad for this because this should be happening with all students. I think it should be all districts doing this from day one, freshman year.
Okay, let's see if I can not have it go again. No.
I was very...
Okay. So you might have heard in the video, the Javier video at the beginning of the presentation, this concern about properly entering A through G coursework into applications. And so this is kind of a confusing area for a lot of people. So I just wanted to pull way back and give you a super high level overview, and then we'll have a couple of people join me to tell you more about it.
A through G requirements are a 15 course sequence that high school students in California have to complete with a C- or better to meet baseline eligibility for admission to a four-year system in the state for CSU and UC. And each of the subject areas, each of the letters represents a subject area, as you see on the screen. The problem is that this information resides in the student information system in school districts, right? So in the student information system, which is what they generate the transcript out of, they sometimes have courses, often have courses that are in the student information system in the local school district written out in one way, and then represented in what's called the course management portal, which is the source of truth database for admissions to four-year colleges in the state in a completely different way. So you see examples on the screen. In the blue column, blue and gray column, Med Sci 2 is the same course, but in the ethics, but it's called Ethics in Business in the course management portal. Algebra 2A, 2B listed as Algebra 1 in the course management portal. Character and Scene, Theater 1. And so what we have is students trying to figure out, looking at their transcript and seeing Algebra 2A, 2B, trying to figure out how to enter that into their college applications. And as you might imagine, they make a lot of mistakes. So the other thing that happens is that because of this disconnect, there is a misunderstanding in many K-12 districts across the state of which of their students are actually going to be admissible to a four-year college. So it's not that the kids aren't doing the work. They are doing the college preparatory coursework. They are getting the grade they're supposed to get to pass. But the course isn't being recognized at the point of applying to college, right? So basically kids aren't getting credit for the courses that they have completed. This obviously is an enormous problem. So we have a team that works on this all day, every day. And we built out some tools on California colleges called the CSU and UC eligibility tools. And the point of these was really to kind of bring transparency to this question and help students track. I had worked with a group of students in East LA 12 years ago now who had all been told they were on track, and then every single one of them was declined from four-year colleges because of this kind of administrative error. And that was sort of the impetus for trying to figure out how this could get fixed. So I'm going to ask our colleague Erica Bennett to join us. Erica was the CCGI lead in Murrieta Unified for many years and is now spending most of her time training other educators, both within Riverside County and beyond, on how to use the tools on californiacolleges.edu. So Erica, if you could walk folks through the next few slides, that would be great.
Sure. Good morning, College to Career panel. I'm Erica Bennett. Happy to provide you with the practitioner perspective of how California colleges kind of plays out for the educators and for the students. So one of the things that you'll notice with this particular slide in general is just the great visualization of really providing the student with exactly where they are being on track with their Cal State GPA. And many of you may know the calculations are different between the Cal State and the UC. So the student is provided with a page for their Cal State GPA, and then they're also provided a page with their UC GPA. You'll notice up at that top left, it gives them what their GPA is based on those A through G requirements that Tess talked about. Over on the right-hand side, the little bullseye, I kind of call it the target bullseye, right? That bullseye provides them with what their progress is. So a user will know exactly what their progress is for their CSU requirements. So if there are some semesters and or years that are missing, it's going to tell them right in that bullseye section. It will tell them what semester they're missing, what course they're missing, what the recommendation is for how they can clean that up in order to meet their A through G requirements. So the other piece that I wanted that Maya referred to, or excuse me, that Tess referred to earlier, was the mismatch. and the identification of the mismatch. So if you look at this particular slide, on the left-hand side, you'll notice that the gray says that this course is not verified A through G, which means that most likely the course is meeting a graduation requirement, such as PE, as you see here. It could be a health class, it could be a freshman foundations class. So it could be any class that is on the student's transcript that is maybe just meeting graduation requirements. But the most important or a critical piece in regards to, as we're talking about A through G, as we're talking about mismatch, as we're talking about meeting those A through G requirements, is the courses that are on the right-hand side in yellow. And you will notice that this means that the course has been listed as A through G by the school, but it is not in the UC course management database. So the mismatch that Tess was talking about, it would be exactly this. So what an educator would need to do is, during the course management portal open enrollment period, if you would like to call it, it would be the educators or the school site that would be responsible for finding out what is the mismatch. A lot of times it may be that English 3 in the school student information system, maybe it just says English 3, but on the UC course management portal, it says English 3-1. So even little, how can I say, mismatches such as that will make the course so that it's a flag to let the educator know or the school site know, and also for that student to know, wow, this course is not matching. We need to go through and fix this.
Let me just pause for 1 second, Erica, because I failed to say that the data in, so what you're looking at is a demo account for a student where their transcript data is uploaded by their school district. And that happens somewhere between nightly and monthly, depending on the school district's own internal capacity to achieve that. So this is essentially a student transcript and is accepted as such by all CSU campuses. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute about other places that that data goes. But Erica, sorry to interrupt you. We can talk about
No. Thank you for the clarification. The other piece that I wanted to just reiterate with that transcript analysis, or with the matching that occurs, that is something that prior to californiacolleges.edu, the counselors would be doing that through a hand analysis transcript process. So, and as you can imagine, that's where, you know, sometimes inadvertently human error occurs. So when you're looking at, you know, counselor caseloads of 500 students, you're looking at hours. And I remember the days where we would block ourselves off for an entire week in order to transcribe transcripts for every single junior, every single senior, who needs summer school, who needs credit recovery. So it is truly a labor-intensive process. And the other piece to think about is that process, depending upon, you know, your level of expertise, there are a lot of validation rules. There are a lot of, you know, ways that you can get a student Cal State eligible that, you know, just years of experience kind of help you to know that. So that's another piece that within California colleges, all of this is embedded within the system. So the verification of the courses, the verification of validations, you know, knowing that a student maybe comes in with Spanish 2 and only has the 2 years of Spanish 2 and Spanish 3, but the system automatically knows that they have 3 years of a Spanish. So there's a lot of pieces that are embedded within the tool that take away that human error.
Erica and
Yes.
Tess, we actually have some really great questions in the chat from community members. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind turning to the chat and seeing if you could answer some of those questions.
Yeah, so I see that my colleague Maya has been responding to some of that in the chat. I'm looking at a question from John about, are the mismatches clearly communicated? Yeah, so what happens is that you'll see in a minute how so educators are given reports on the back end that look something like this, although this is not the report that we're looking at. And then our technical assistance team works with all of the school districts to ensure that they are cleaning up and aligning those courses so that when students get to the point of looking at their eligibility tools, they're quite accurate. And then also to make sure that as the data ports over to the higher ed systems, that they are moving over accurate coursework for them. So they actually don't even need to know what to do with it because the system, their educators and then the system does it for them. If there is another question, school doesn't have enough. What happens when a school doesn't have enough counselors? Well, that's the ongoing quandary, right? What we're trying to do is, you know, we can't control for that. That's beyond our purview. But what we try and do is to automate and provide as much scaffolding as possible so that educators can really target their energy on the students that are falling through the cracks, right? So the ratios are what they are, and I would be strongly supportive of increasing the ratio of counselors in schools. But what we do is we use the tools to try and simplify processes as much as possible for students so that they can navigate them on their own and then provide educators with the data they need to try to manage what are generally untenable caseloads. I'm gonna move us forward and we'll keep answering questions in just a second if that's okay, because some of these are going to be answered by what's coming next. So when students become seniors on California colleges, they can launch their CCC Apply, Cal State Apply, UC application, their FAFSA, and their DREAM Act, all from within the one platform. And then they can track what's going on with those applications, whether they've properly submitted everything they needed to submit, for example. So there are different statuses that show up for both students and for educators. And I have two people with me who are going to talk for a minute about these, but let me first just show you briefly what happens. So when students apply to a community college, we provide their course data, essentially their transcript data, to the community college CCC Tech Center, and that data feeds into what's called the multiple measures placement service. In the CSU system, the data is used for more efficient and accurate admissions processes, as well as better first-year academic placement, and can reduce delays in the process because the data is submitted in a super normalized fashion. At UC, we're just in the process. Currently, our K-12 partners can track applications, which is really helpful, and we're in discussions right now with UC planning out how to increase that functionality of being able to import course data and do some of the other pieces that our end users have asked for. And then with the Student Aid Commission, when students launch their FAFSA or their CADA, we're able to share data with CSAC that provides one more data point to support how they match the two key data elements that are used for the purposes of Cal Grant eligibility determinations. This is just a snapshot of data that transcript data and applications that have moved over the last, however many months it is since the beginning of the fiscal year. And I wanted to just, I think it was in the initial video, but I'll show you just real briefly. This is what happens when a student, we use the Cal State example because Cal State is sort of the gold standard for what all of our users want the system to be able to deliver for all systems. So this is a student logging into their California colleges account. They're going to the Cal State application. There are multiple ways they can get to it. The system tells them we're going to share your data. Are you good with that? Multiple levels of legal have backed that up. Once they get to Cal State Apply, it triggers a request for them to import their data, and boom, their data is imported. And what's being imported here are the green courses on the eligibility tools. So it's all the courses that have already been validated. That spills into the high school coursework section on Cal State Apply, as well as what I call the rainbow sorter of A through G coursework. I don't know what the actual name of this is. And again, it's pulling in this data from California colleges from that academic planner section. And then this is the back end of Cal State Apply. It's called Web Admit. And that little black circle indicates that it's official transcript data that's been pulled in. And so I'm going to ask April Gromo from the CSU Chancellor's Office, who joins us today, to talk a little bit about how this helps students and her colleagues across the 23 campuses to manage the application and admissions process.
Thank you, Tess. Good morning, everybody. I'm April Gromo. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management Services at the CSU Chancellor's Office. What I'd like to share today is a lot of what Tess already covered, but also stress the fact that our strong partnership with California colleges really supports students, families, counselors, and our campuses. The ability for students to import and link their California Colleges account to their Cal State Apply account allows them to quickly import their SSID, which is important as we look at long-term research. So as we are able to connect the students' information with their K through 12 to the CSU data. As we know, we do ask students for their SSID, but it's very confusing for them to find it. So the ability for us to just import that. Then all of the high schools they attended. This is important, of course, for students that have attended multiple high schools. We know sometimes students move around in the state. So CCGI is able to import those high schools, and then as we've shown, all of the A through G coursework. So this is a huge time saver for students, and I would just, as Tess already shared, it can be hugely confusing depending on what high schools have in their student information system versus what they've entered in UC-CMP. So the ability for a student to pick a course is available in Cal State Apply, but again, if they're looking at their high school transcript, trying to enter that course in Cal State Apply, it might not even show up depending on how it's named in UC-CMP. The other piece that's important is that students often see on their high school transcript a course that is notated as honors, but then in UC-CMP, it is not an honors course. So again, we're able to take all of that information, make sure it's correct in CCGI, and move it into Cal State Apply quickly and easily. So as you can imagine, we have students trying to apply for college at the last moment, their parents, they're sitting down trying to fill out that application, trying to understand the differences between, the student information system and UC-CMP. So the process does save students a lot of time. Also, the pieces that we're looking forward to, I think Tess will share, we're working on a project to bring in 8th semester transcripts. So we would, in June, pull this information again into Cal State Apply so that we have official transcript data. We feel that this is going to be a huge improvement for students. It's going to reduce a barrier of having to provide their high school transcripts. And as you can see on the screen, we notate whether or not that information is official coming from the district. And then also something that wasn't mentioned today is that students who are not part of a district that is contracted with CCGI does have the ability to have what we call an open access account. So a student who is not affiliated with a current district can actually go into California colleges, go through some of the career assessments, and have them manually enter their coursework, and then they can actually move that into Cal State Apply when they're ready. So we do have a number of students that use that functionality, even though they're not in a district that is currently loading the Cal State Apply information. So I just wanted to share that we really appreciate our partnership with California colleges, and we're really looking forward to those additional 300,000 students coming on board and really helping us support them and making a CSU application and the process more attainable for students. Thank you.
Thanks so much, April. And then this is just a slide that gives you a snapshot of kind of where we're at with each higher ed segment. So in the legislation, it says that all of these application processes have to be streamlined for students. And this is where we're at. There's sort of 4 parts of streamlining, right? There's actually pre-populating, as you saw the data do on Cal State Apply. There's real-time data exchange, meaning how it's really important that we not have like a week-long delay between a student launching an application and an educator being able to check whether or not that's verified submission. So the frequency with which we can exchange data. Again, the ability to track application status is currently available for all 3 apps, which is great. And then whether or not we're sending data to the receiving institution for the purposes of smoothing out some of the processes for students. And so now I'm going to ask Gina Sandoval, who is a colleague of ours from Fresno High and Fresno Unified, to talk for a minute about her experience using these application integrations.
Hello, good morning. I'm Gina Sandoval. I'm a counselor at Fresno High School in the Fresno Unified School District. And we've been using californiacolleges.edu for a few years now. I'm thinking somewhere around 5 years, and it has really grown to serve us very well. We handle all of our college and financial aid applications through CCGI with our students. In Fresno Unified, our students are pretty much, the vast majority are first generation low income students with a high mobility rate. So our students often move from school to school, both within our district and around outlying districts, which oftentimes can present transcript issues. So we really take in our counseling program an intensive approach to servicing our students. What that means is that I sit with each student on my caseload, seniors, and fill out their applications to at least one community college. And then our students who do meet those A through G requirements, we do have them complete the four-year university, both the CSU and the UC applications through Cal State Apply. I can tell you that students find the application process very overwhelming when you have multiple websites and usernames to create. It can be a huge barrier to students. So using CCGI to launch our applications has really streamlined that approach and has really helped us to increase our college applications, both with at the community college, definitely Cal State Apply, and even our UCs, because we do use that data, that real-time data to track which students have completed. We know who should be completing it and use CCGI to track that data. Again, because so many of our students are first generations, they lack that experience and the ability oftentimes to navigate these systems independently. So having this tool has really helped. The integration between California colleges and Cal State Apply is exactly what all application experiences should be like if we want them to be welcoming to first generation students. So the importing of the transcript has been a huge asset for us as counselors, also for our students, because it really limits the errors that can be made on a college application. And we all know in education that those errors are what leads to students not immediately being admitted or creating additional information that needs to be provided. So what we have found is that literally in working with our students, the mistakes that our students make are when they're having to manually input data and information like from their transcript, because they don't always understand how to read a transcript or even how to interpret what the classes mean, especially when we have them coming from multiple high schools on the same transcript. For all the reasons other people have mentioned earlier, entering A through G coursework is not straightforward. It's very time consuming. It requires a bunch of us relying on teenagers, again, to be detail oriented. So it would be really helpful to have the application come into alignment with Cal State Apply. Every year we're hoping every time we get into that college application season that we get this assistance for all levels, so we can minimize those application errors. For CC Apply applications, again, less complicated because we don't enter the coursework, but there are some questions on there that students always find challenging, and it would be really great if the data needed to answer those questions, like their residency, could be transferred from their California colleges.edu account directly into their CCC Apply. So there's just a lot of information that would be helpful if we take out of our students' hands that can be immediately imported if when they launch through their CCGI account. We've benefited from the program. I'm glad that it has grown to where it is now. We've been using it again for quite some time. So each year it gets better and better and better.
Thanks so much, Gina. I really appreciate you joining us. I always love looking at Fresno's accounts because they have 100% registration of all student accounts, and then they do like all their applications. There are a bunch of districts across the state like that, but I wish it was everyone. I did want to quickly answer, Wesley, your question about Common Application. We are, we've prioritized broad access institutions. We can do the Common App. It's going to be, there's some additional cost to the state of us doing so. And so we've been trying to figure out like all the different priorities and where does that fall. Many districts have asked about it, so it's definitely on the roadmap. And then I saw that there was a question about whether or not we keep student data in the system. As of now, we do keep graduated students in the system for an indefinite time period at the moment, but it's 3 to 5 years is probably what we'll focus on for now. I know we've got 3 years at this point. So I think we have the class of like 2019. We still have the data from there forward, with the idea that not all students go directly from K-12 into higher education. Let me get through a couple more things and then we will open up to total Q&A. I did just want to briefly talk about how the Cradle-to-Career system legislation, how this work is meeting the needs that are articulated in that legislation. So these are the things that we're required to do under the legislation. It's, you know, the financial aid lessons, for example, that you saw are fantastic. The college and career lessons need to come into alignment with those. So there's still active work to make the system as functional as it needs to be for students. In fact, when we met with Anna and 3 of her colleagues, I can't remember if it was Jesus or Katrina, but one of them, Anna said, could you guys make all of the lessons like the financial, like, could you do a lesson like that for applications to college, right? And we were like, yep, it's in active work right now. But it takes time to build a fully customized approach to this for the state. It's not an off-the-shelf kind of product. So I did want to share, this is some of the enhancements that are required by the legislation. And so you'll see that for each of the educational segments and CSAC, there is work that is either in one of these phases, right? From unstarted through planning, legal, tech development, and implementation. So April talked about the 8-semester transcript, which we've completed the technology development on, but needs to be rolled out as part of the next application cycle. We are in planning phases with UC on the streamlined application. We've just finished legal with CSAC on the increased frequency and breadth of the data exchange. We're talking with CDE about how to get, finalizing some planning around how we can get the data we need for phase 1 of the work around generalized student accounts. So we'll keep this updated as we move forward, but this is just a kind of a snapshot of where things are at and where they're needing to get to meet the legislation. And then the low-hanging fruit of all of this, because technology development takes time and sharing data agreements takes time and all of that. But as you've heard from the presentation, there's a lot of value to students and to educators across the state. And so one of the things that we would really love to see come out of the early work of Cradle-to-Career is some aligned communication about promoting these tools. We found that when institutions of higher ed and CSAC also have promoted the use of these tools, there's much better uptake. K-12 is looking to higher ed systems and the state for more direction on how to do this work. And so I think that promoting this collectively could go a long way towards helping get these into the hands of more and more students. We found, we just did a user survey that we're just starting to get the results in on. And one of the things that we found is that where students said that they didn't use the tools, it was because they didn't know those tools existed on the same platform they were already using. And so I think there's a lot to do around just building awareness to drive utilization. And then the last thing I wanted to share, and we'll open it up to questions and answers, is that the reason we refer to this as an infrastructure is that there's so many good policies that the state has been pushing forward in the last several years around student success. Maybe foremost among them is AB 705, which was John's work over many, many years, and Member Irwin's leadership in the assembly. But that's a hard thing to implement when there isn't a universal structure in place, the data part of it, right? To get the transcript data that needs to be used to help place students. Same thing with universal FAFSA, huge equity play, right? Enormous opportunity to change the game for students. But if we don't provide the districts with the tools they need, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to roll out, right? You have to have things, there just isn't, the ratios aren't there to support students one by one in completing those applications. And then we also, we invest huge amounts of money in things like A through G completion improvement grants, right? Again, providing districts with tools that say, like, this will run you a report that can show you exactly where to focus your attention that will help move a student from off track to on track. That's how we see this being leveraged. These are just 3 examples. But that's how we really hope that over time, the more that we can collaborate across segments, the more that we can help provide that infrastructure that makes it possible for people to actually experience the changes that the policies are designed to impact. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to whomever. I don't know, Kathy, if you were going to facilitate the question part. I haven't had a chance to fully read what's going on in the chat. Or Amy, did you want somebody going to feed me questions?
I'm not seeing anything currently. We'll go ahead and have folks populate the chat if you have questions.
For Anna, for Gina, for Erica, for April, myself, doesn't matter.
We have one from our board member, Assembly Member Irwin.
So Tess, one of the questions, why is UC so far behind? What is the holdup in getting this tool into all districts? Will private nonprofits be integrate eventually?
So I'll take that in reverse order. The private nonprofits, colleges, I assume you're talking about, as opposed to nonprofit college access providers. That's there isn't a uniform application of the AICCU membership. About 40% of them are currently on the common application. So that's our best way to get the bulk of those colleges, but it won't get all of them. So there's that. This is just now becoming free to K-12 as a function of this legislation. So that's one thing that will help to speed implementation. I think the other things are related to, again, this aligned communication, this need for people to know that it's don't just choose whatever tool. This is the tool that's going to give you what you need to be successful in this transition. And then the third thing is, there's no mandate for K-12, and it's a practice change. It takes time. The more value that we can deliver, like the UC integration, like being able to pre-populate the applications. Honestly, the biggest thing people are asking for right now is dual enrollment, being able to integrate dual enrollment data into the system. So the more we can meet the needs of our end users, all of which requires collaboration with all of the systems, right? So those are the things that I think are most effective in helping to move the work forward.
And Tess, I see that we have a couple hands raised. We'll go ahead and go with Alejandra and then Thomas.
And hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra Costa. I'm Senior Policy Analyst with California Competes, and I'm here as a substitute for Sue Jin, our Executive Director. So nice to meet everyone. Thanks again for such a great presentation. I learned a lot, and as a former advisor, I also know from experience that this would be a very helpful tool. So I'm really glad to see that we're looking to scale this. I'm curious if you could speak to a potential future with CCGI that could help adults seeking go back to college, go through that entire process. There's millions of adults in California that are interested in pursuing post-secondary education in the near future, and they also lack guidance in this process. And I think that this would be really useful for them. So I'd love to hear if there's any future for adult students or potential students to use CCGI.
Thanks, Alejandra. Good to meet you. The only thing that we're doing right now for that is holding on to their data from high school, right? So, which is not trivial, right? Because in many instances, they'll need that depending on what they're doing when they return. But right now we're holding on to that data. I think it's a bigger question for the whole C2C system, how best to meet the needs of those returning adult learners. And we are happy to support in whatever ways we can. Currently, I mean, it takes a huge amount of expertise and sort of due diligence to get this right for any population. So we've really been narrowly focused on our K-12 student needs. But as the system evolves over time, we certainly think that's an incredibly important population for us to collectively be dealing with. And if it turns out that this is the way folks want to do it, then we're certainly open to that possibility. But I think there's other ways to possibly come at that as well.
Thank you. Tom?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Tessa. Nice to see you again. Good morning, everyone. To follow up on Assemblymember Irwin's question, I represent nonprofit colleges and universities, and I know we've had this discussion many times, Tessa, about integrating nonprofit higher ed into CCGI. I guess my question is, what would it take at this point to do that? I think we have this wonderful opportunity with CCGI being incorporated into the C2C system. This seems like the really opportune time to really think about doing this. I know there are some, challenges, of course. You mentioned, the Common App, only 40% of nonprofit colleges use it. But, what investments would it take to get us there?
Yeah, good question. I think the answer is one, getting Common App integrated, and two, like everything else, doing the communications and engagement work to get your members to understand what the potential additional value add to them is of then becoming, I don't like to promote a particular vendor of any kind, but Common App sort of is the obvious choice for this. So it would, what would be the way for them to get involved with Common Application, start using that, which is a significant systems change. So we'd also have to do more diligence with your membership to figure out maybe there is another way that we just haven't identified. I think it would be worth convening and talking with them to figure out what are their pain points, because that's really what we aim to do, is to help to reduce pain points, both for students first and foremost, but also for the institutions that are supporting them, right? So the whole reason that the CSU work has been so out front is that that's the system that most, A, largest volume of applications on the four-year side, and then B, they validate every course at the point of application, so that we were solving an actual pain point for them, which is why it was something that was pushed forward so quickly. So I think it's both. I think it's, there's some tech dev and us getting the word out, but it would be really about figuring out what does your membership need to make it worth their while to participate.
Do you foresee like a financial investment by the state?
Yeah, there's definitely, the current projections that we have given the state are not inclusive of a full-scale rollout of Common Application yet. There's work to be done on that front that we still need to figure out exactly how it needs to happen before we can scope it and figure out exactly what it would cost.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, and did I see Catalina? Did you have your hand raised?
I did, but it's okay. I don't know. We were on time. If I could.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to share. I just want to say thank you to the amazing presenters and for sharing you're in the trenches in this work. And I think some of the comments in the chat emphasize that, because, for example, someone said, can't the counselor go in and match that and change that report? No, it depends. If that counselor is the one listed on the UCCMP course list as authorized to make these changes, then the answer is yes. But I know they put in the chat the link so you can go and check which, by high schools, usually by high school, by school district, who can make those updates. I just want to say a huge thank you to Anna. What an amazing student. She answered in the chat her experience. She used the CSU application integration feature, and it's something I'm familiar with. I'm also like to be a practitioner in my job, and it takes me 35 minutes to help a student apply to at least 4 or more CSU applicate campuses. It's integrated, it's that quick. So we can make that commitment. We make the commitment, especially if you're eligible for the fee waiver, you will apply to all at least 4 campuses. And we can make that commitment if on one, because they qualify, but 2, it takes 35 minutes. It is that quick, and Anna's not in her head because it's amazing how it integrates it. And I think I just want to emphasize, because not everyone here gets to be in the weeds and works with amazing students like Anna. It's the first tool we have that's not self-reported. Right? It's not self-reported information. It's verified information from a transcript. It's hand-holding. They did get a question in the chat that says, who helps the districts with that? And this is the first time someone's giving them a report, that says, hey, these are some of the things that are mismatched. How can we help you clean up your transcript data? And there's so many reasons why we don't have time to go on how that happens. But I just want to say that, for example, I had just in my office, a big box of things from some UC campuses. When I get items, I can query out who applied to these campuses and send them something from, hey, congratulations, you applied to UC Merced. They sent us some items, here you go. So if you were to ask me, Assemblymember Irwin, if you were to ask if your districts were all partners in your area, they were to ask you were to ask them how many males applied to at least one CSU. you'll finally get verified data, not self-reported. It's not something a student has to go in and click yes, or it's all verified. And then you can proactively go after who hasn't even started an application and they're eligible. So I just want to emphasize, if you're not in the weeds day to day, it's not self-reported. It is verified data, verified if they did their application, verified if they did their FAFSA. No more leaving it up to the students to tell us what they did and didn't do. So I just wanted to share that. And just, again, thank you, Anna, if we can give her some love. Super, you did a great job.
Yeah,
Anna is not your standard 12th grader, just so we're all clear. But Anna, I don't know if you want to say anything about it, but when you and I spoke and you said that your friends were not as motivated, do you just want to say one word on that and how the tools help?
Oh yeah. So I've always been like, I guess, you know, being an immigrant, having like an immigrant family, it's always been like pushing to go to school, because it's like, it's going above and beyond from what we already did. And so since I was a freshman, literally my second week of freshman year, I talked to my freshman counselor and I was like, can I plan out my next 4 years? And he looked at me like I was a little crazy, but it was what I wanted to do. I was like, I need to plan out my next 4 years because I don't know what's going to happen. And so I've had a lot of friends where, you know, they don't do that. They don't go out of their way to plan out. They don't go out of their way to actually want to know what they're going to do later on in the next year. They kind of live semester by semester, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's like sometimes they need a little push to actually go and check out the tools that are basically handed to us on a silver platter, you know? And so my freshman year, I used California College's EDU, but I was like, oh, I'm a freshman. I'm not going to be worrying about this right now. I have, you know, AP Human Geography to worry about. So I would go back and forth between the website just because I also had it for a class. And so I would kind of look through, kind of click around, be like, what is this? What does this do? And I would tell my friends, I found this on the website. And they'd be like, well, what is that for? And I'd be like, well, for financial aid. What is financial aid? Oh, you'll need a senior year. Okay, senior year, I won't worry about it until then, you know? And so when they did finally start to worry about it, they came to me and they were like, well, what did you do? And I was like, well, I used California Colleges because it was so easy to use and it was all in there, all in one place. And so I guess being the motivated one and telling everybody what I found out about the website kind of made everybody come back to me and ask me questions of how I did it, which was really fun and kind of nice to see, like, I told you, you know. But other than that, it was really easy. I love the website. I'm still using it now. I kind of check back on it every like other month and I'm like, did they add something new? You know, I'm just wondering anything, but yeah, I mean, I love it. It was so good.
What a great ambassador. Thank you so much, Anna. And we'll take one final question from board member Robert Taborda before we do our break today.
Yeah, thanks again to Tess, to Anna, and the rest of the panel for sharing your experiences and perspectives. It's really helping all of us on the board and the public to get a really good sense of what it means to deliver tools to all Californians in support of our Cradle-to-Career initiative. I want to circle back to something that was briefly mentioned, Tess, which is this issue of dual enrollment. And I know that I just want to get a really good sense of what you think the challenges are of putting something like dual enrollment courses into the fold in terms of prioritization, in terms of operationalizing that idea. Because I do think that this is a really critical moment that we have in California to try to understand how we can leverage our existing tools and initiatives in order to support dual enrollment courses. Secretary Cardona has made it a priority in this upcoming school year. The governor has obviously dedicated some resources to it in his most recent budget proposal. And then at the local level where I work with school districts, I know that it's a topic of conversation, is really critically important. And a lot of policy papers have recently discussed the importance of it from an equity standpoint. And furthermore, you know, one of the main challenges at the local level that we see is local school districts working alongside local community colleges or institutions of higher education, trying to make sense of the way that they can share data with one another on this very topic. So from your perspective, Tess, what are some of the main challenges that we will need to consider if we want to continue to cultivate this idea?
Yeah. So it is the thing that we hear most frequently from our K-12 partners and community colleges that we work with is like, this is the place where folks need help. And it's the place that we most naturally fit because of the intersection between K-12 and higher ed. What we've identified is a sort of multi-phase process. So there's one very low-hanging fruit thing that we could be doing in terms of getting a few more data elements back from the tech center that would help identify every student as either being a dual enrollment student or not, because the ones who are in CCAP, people somehow know who they are, but the ones who go independently, like Anna's been taking a bunch of courses in community colleges at Mount San Jacinto. And I don't know if she's necessarily going to be easily identified in the systems. So the first thing is making sure we know which students we're talking about. And that's actually not that hard and something that we have a pretty clear proposal around. I think that the next phase of the data system includes proposals around the eTran platform, which I think could potentially play a significant role in this. But if we could share the data back, we would actually have a unified transcript for a student, which I know if April's still here, she would happily talk about why that's useful in the admissions process for the 4 years as well. But even in the community college system, we have people say to us all the time, could you identify who took dual enrollment coursework, include that in the transcript, and then send it to us? Because then, the data doesn't move within systems across their data systems necessarily either, right? So it's an area that we've had a lot of conversations with practitioners around, and we have some very concrete first steps, but I think there's a lot of complexity to the part about bringing the course data back in that just needs much more due diligence and conversation to make sure that there would be a viable approach.
And I'll just add one important note. So one of the reasons that it's so important to distinguish the dual enrollment classes from regular high school coursework is because students actually receive a year of A through G credit for a college course. They actually receive a bump in their GPA for taking that course. So it's really important that we're able to distinguish that from a high school course. So we do have a lot of information out about, anything that is going to show up on a college transcript needs to be entered as a college course. We provide guidance on how those courses are matched to A through G versus general education at the college level. So we are definitely interested in how we can move eTranscript California forward, not only for dual enrollment, but for the community college students themselves, because community college students also have to manually enter their coursework today in order to apply for admissions at the CSU and the UC. So having an e-transcript integration would help both populations.
Great. Thank you so much, Tess, for your presentation today and all of your staff and partners that you've brought with you. This concludes the Q&A session for our board members on CCGI. So it is time now for us to take a quick break. So 10 minutes and we will return at 11:20. Make sure you get a stretch and some tea or some coffee. Now, let me start again. Welcome back, everyone. We turn now from looking at the amazing things ahead for students to looking at how we can help on the teacher side. So the next item on our agenda is the teacher retention and training dashboard scope. The teacher retention and training dashboard is the first product of the data system. So there's a few steps that are needed for the Office of Cradle-to-Career to implement the proof of concept, including acquiring signatures for the participation agreement from our data partners, and then of course, procurement. We have Joy with us today. Joy, do you want to talk a little bit about the proof of concept and how that fits into the procurement process?
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. For those of you all who were perhaps involved in the longer process, you might have heard about a pilot last spring that we wanted to do with some of the remaining planning dollars. And so essentially, our role is to more or less still do that pilot. However, we're going to be rolling it as a proof of concept into the general build out of the analytical tools. So this is so you heard all about CCGI. Think of those as the user-facing tools, and then the analytical tools is the data system we need to build, what's called the data warehouse. And so what we'll be doing with what was originally christened the pilot will instead be the proof of concept. And essentially, the purpose is still the same: to validate our design, the architecture, how we build it, the processes, but really go through that full cycle from, oh, here's some data sets, not all the data that we envision in the system, but we're going to start with one, and we're going to go from the whole process of bringing the data in, matching it, cleaning it, reconciling it, all that delicious data preparation work. And then we're going to push that into what's called the warehouse, and then we're going to build visualization tools, dashboards on top of it. And so what we want to do is, instead of taking a bite of the whole data pie, if you will, we want to cut ourselves a delicious slice and eat in moderation and really put that out fully. But instead of that being a separate pilot from the full procurement, we're literally just going to bake it into what's called in the world of doing this, a release cycle. So instead of waiting to build all the dashboards at the end, what we want to do is we want to take our pie slices, we want to serve them up to each group on a sort of delayed basis, and the idea is that pilot will now become the first release of the analytical portion of the data system. And so the next steps, I'll read through just for diligence, but we're still working on finalizing and getting those legal agreements signed. We're in the midst, and sorry, I had to miss the very beginning of the meeting, but I know Marianne mentioned an update on the procurement process. We're going through the formal approval process with CDT, which is actually mandated in the legislation. But we're already starting to work on those procurement documents. Our team this week, well, actually last week, we hit the ground running on that. And then of course that will lead with a contract, and then working with the services provider to configure our technology stack and do that proof of concept / pilot, and then move forward on that release cycle. And happy to answer any questions you all have on that.
And for those of you that are unfamiliar, Joy Bonagoro is our State Chief Data Officer, and as you can tell, a wonderful and passionate proponent of this project.
I am. I'm so excited about this project.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. The initial scope of the teacher retention and training dashboard included several important topics. They're all listed here. We wanted to look at the pipeline for teacher preparation and examine the path from credentialing to teaching in the classroom. We wanted to look at how newly credentialed teachers' racial and ethnic characteristics compared to those of their students. That's a really important component of looking at data, is to ensure that what you're looking at is inclusive in that way. We also wanted to look at retention, how they enter the profession, what are the teacher characteristics around retention rate. And at one point, we were lucky enough, I think, during the planning process to have some representatives associated with the CTA. I believe it was Abraham, hopefully I didn't get that wrong, and Kimberly Lawrence, and they participated in those planning discussions. So today we have partners. Next slide. From CTC, this is so very confusing. Let's only just say it out loud instead of the acronym. So Commission on Teacher Credentialing, Mary Sandy, the CDE, Jonathan Eisler, and CSU's Paul Tess, who've come forward with an expansion of the proof of concept dashboard. And our data partners who would be expanding the allowable use of their data have already agreed to this particular use of their data. So Jonathan, Mary, and Paul, do you want to talk about the proposed expansion?
Sure. Thank you, Amy. And this is Jonathan Iser. I'll start first and then hand it over to Mary and Paul. And to kind of follow up with what Joy mentioned earlier, the CDE and CTC, we're talking early on about creating some sort of pilot project that would make sense within the Cradle-to-Career system. Had a lot of good ideas. And to give a little bit of background and context, and I know there's several people actually on the line here that we have data sharing agreements and MOUs with. We had been working with CTC for many years. This is the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, for many years on linking our CalPADS teacher staffing course type data along with their credential information from CTC. And we formalized that relationship, the agreement, in 2018. We realized very shortly after that, which is prone to happen a lot when we have new legislation and so on, that there were new requirements that we needed to build into that relationship, in particular around the reporting of misassignments and different types of teacher assignment data. So we actually amended our agreement in 2020 with the CTC to account for that. I know a lot of people are anxious to see kind of the first batch of data of matched CDE, CTC data on assignments coming out very soon. So that's kind of a little bit of the history. And just to very briefly kind of mention some of the original thoughts and questions that we were discussing about a year ago or so for this pilot project. The topic or the title that we were looking at was California's teacher workforce and retention trends. And we were looking at kind of the relationship between the CTC data, CDE data, and also working with Paul Tuss and his colleagues at the CSU on kind of connecting, those teachers that were prepared within the CSU system, but also other teacher preparation programs throughout the state, and how can we track those teachers over time. And one of the purposes of the pilot was to demonstrate the power of our linked longitudinal data, looking at teacher workforce, also, obviously for informing, but also strengthening workforce development efforts throughout the state. We want to make it really clear that one of the intentions of this pilot was not to evaluate specific programs or specific teachers, but really to look at those kind of linkages between our K-12 data and then also through line into the credential data, and then eventually into workforce data, which I know this next slide is kind of covering part of that. And just to throw out a couple of the kind of possible research questions we were interested in, we were looking at the extent to which educator preparation programs, how they recruited and prepared teachers to take jobs and stay in those jobs. How well is our teacher pipeline supporting the development of a diverse teaching workforce demographically? What are the problems or leaks in that pipeline, right? Which teachers are staying, which teachers are leaving, and why? And then also kind of looking at, what is the likelihood of newly credentialed teachers for taking jobs in the public schools within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? What do those teachers look like demographically in terms of representation for racial and ethnic groups? What type of schools are they going to? Are they going to schools with maybe underrepresented racial ethnic groups or higher percentage of socioeconomically disadvantaged students? And the final kind of areas we really want to look into is, are there some of these completers, these teacher completers, are they going into the fields where we know we have shortages, right? The STEM fields, special education, bilingual, all of those, really high demand, high need areas within K-12. And then finally, just kind of from a descriptive standpoint, what are the retention rates, right? How well are these teachers being retained, these different cohorts of teachers being retained within the public K-12 arena within California? And again, looking through at all of these from an equity lens, looking at the ethnic racial diversity as well as gender. So those are just some of the framing things that I wanted to just add on to what Amy and Joy mentioned, and I'll happy to turn it over to Mary and Paul now.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Vixie Sandy. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. That is the CTC, not the C2C. I'll just call us the Commission. And it's really a pleasure to be in this moment, in this conversation at this time. We've been dealing with teacher shortages since the recession, and that has been a growing problem in our schools, ensuring that we have sufficiently a sufficient number of fully credentialed teachers to serve in our schools is absolutely critical to the enterprise. And I mean, it almost goes without saying, and yet over the last several years, the governor and the legislature have invested close to $1 billion in just through the commission's budget to work on recruiting teachers from a variety of places and sources, from the classified school grants to the residency grant programs, to looking at undergraduate pathways that are integrating degree programs and credentials. Really, essentially, this investment strategy has been about attracting teachers to come into the field and growing our infrastructure to do so. And our ability to really understand what the impacts of that investment are and could be in the future are hampered by the absence of data. That I can tell you how many teachers we credential every single year, but I cannot tell you, as the Commission on Teacher Credentialing that licenses this workforce, what happens next. So understanding the recruitment, the employment, the retention, the attrition, and the mobility of this workforce is really critical. And this opportunity to build the first proof of concept and the first dashboard with C2C is just incredibly timely for us. The expansion from the original concept to include employment development department data around earnings will help us to understand for the teachers who are leaving the workforce, where are they going next? What can we learn about that mobility that helps us understand what it takes and what it will take for us to recruit and retain the workforce that we need for our schools. Understanding what the degrees and pathways have been for the teachers who are coming into credentialing and moving into the field, and then potentially moving out of the field again, gives us another data point through which I think we will gain and hope to gain a much better understanding of where our investments are really taking hold, and what's happening in the context of employment that may be causing struggle in maintaining a sufficient workforce for our schools. So we are very excited at the Commission to move away from the various proxies that we've relied on to understand what's happening with the workforce, and into this very well-structured, well-designed conceptually at this point dashboard that will shed important light on how to really understand what's happening with the workforce, and direct our resources and strategies and whatever interventions are necessary to really focus on the retention of that workforce, and maybe help us get to some root cause analyses that help us to understand the picture much better than we do currently today. So I'm happy to join Jonathan in answering any questions that you might have, and I'll turn it over to Paul Tuss from the CSU system.
Thank you, Mary. And I will say, from the perspective of the CSU, we're really happy to be part of this project. CSU just in December recently released some educator preparation pipeline dashboards that show the number of students who are applying, enrolling, completing our teacher prep programs in the CSU, and then where they end up teaching, how long they end up teaching. And the interest in this data, now that it's become available, has just been astonishing. It's being used to inform both policy decisions. I was just emailed this morning about completer data. When is the new round of completer data going to be ready? Because we're trying to make decisions around EO 1077. People are asking to see the enrollment data because they are trying to gauge the impact of AB 130 and some of the changes to credential program entry requirements. But it's a lot of the internal CSU initiatives that have benefited the most. We have two areas where we've been focusing on. One is increasing the number of STEM teachers that we prepare, and data from the early stage of the pipeline about what undergraduate majors people in our credential programs earned before becoming teachers, and also which came through the community college pathway. These are two really important feeder streams for teacher preparation, and it really helps inform our recruitment efforts. And then the other big area we're focusing on in the CSU is increasing the diversity of the teacher workforce so that it matches the enormous diversity of student population throughout the state. So having the ability to disaggregate both pre-teacher credential program experiences and background characteristics of the teacher candidates so that we can recruit from those populations. Community colleges tend to be a lot of first generation and a lot of BIPOC candidates, and that is a great place for us to focus recruitment efforts. And again, we want to know our undergraduate programs. We want to be able to make sure that they're preparing teachers so they have an easy time once they get into our program. So I think this is a phenomenal effort to be going statewide, and happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Jonathan, Mary, and Paul. So at this time, we'll go ahead and take questions and comments from our board members. First up is Thomas. Tom?
Hi again, everyone. Hi, Mary. Nice to see you again. Quick question. At this point, what are the opportunities to include nonprofits in this now? Our school is credentialed quite a bit. I think for over 45% of new teachers in the state. I know we're a little bit late to catch on to this work specifically, but if it's still possible, we'd love to include our institutions, at least the ones with programs and schools of education in this dashboard.
Well, my understanding, and I defer to the Cradle-to-Career team to have more insight into that, but essentially this proof of concept idea is really just that, to figure out how we put this together and how the dashboards come together. But the absolute goal, from my perspective, is that all of our teacher preparation institutions are participating in this. I think that there is a legal agreement, a participation agreement that needs to be signed, and that process is outside my purview. But getting started is one stage of this work, and growing it to full capacity may be a second stage. And I don't know how much is possible to do all at once. I defer.
And Thomas, this is Jonathan. I mean, from my perspective, following up with what Mary's saying is, yeah, as long as all the legal agreements are in place and the infrastructure within the actual C2C is in place, if your teachers are showing up in our CalPAD system, then absolutely they would be, they'd be captured, which they would be, right? So I think that's just the precursor, is to make sure that your group is also linking into that kind of linked data set being managed by the C2C system. And as long as it can match and bounce against our CalPADS records, they'd be in there eventually.
Great. Yeah, perhaps we can then have a conversation offline. I know wrangling 40 at this point, wrangling 43 institutions into this, it might be a little bit difficult, especially with all the legal agreements, but I'm sure, at least a few would be interested in participating. And I think it would lead to, a better understanding about how to integrate the nonprofit colleges and universities as a whole into the Cradle-to-Career system. I know, we're not supposed to, the timeline isn't to integrate us for another, handful of years, but I think just having that sense now of, what that would take would lend to that in a few years when all of our institutions would be integrated at that time. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Tom, and happy to have a follow-up conversation about it.
Thanks, Marianne.
All right, and looks like we have a question from board member Sylvia Alva.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this project. The CSU is a major producer of teachers in California, and we're really proud to be at the design table and thinking about this tool and the work that Paul has already done for the CSUs. I think one of the things that I would like to invite Mary and Paul and others to think about is that deans of education, those who run accredited programs, are very often asked by the commission to engage in a lot of self-reflection for accreditation purposes. And it would be very helpful to think about the most essential questions and ensure that the tool has both a support role in terms of helping us understand who our teacher candidates are, but also helping us also answer this intense and often cumbersome list of questions that we need to stand in good standing for accreditation purposes. So I just offer that as I think a helpful insight in terms of the opportunities to collect data that's practical, both for data analytic types as well as for academic leaders on our colleges and universities. Thank you.
All right, and next up we have board member Catalina Cifuentes. The question.
Thank you. As someone super excited, as someone who's had to help substitute teach during these times, I'm just excited to see this happening and the work going behind. I know it's definitely not easy with the multiple agencies. I just want to add, I don't know if it's a consideration or something maybe on the back end we're thinking about, but how do we take this information, take this dashboard and be able to streamline some of our new programs or adding programs, like for example, the Golden State Teacher Award, right? And so right now students are having to apply on their own and hear about it from the higher ed partners or any other inter-credential awarding and awarding organizations. How do we do this to proactively make sure if you're eligible, you automatically are put into this or you're given the information instead of waiting for them. So I'm just thinking, as I'm sure there's going to be not only current investments in California for teaching, but I know there'll be future investments. So how do we look at automating some of that or embedding it within this when they first sign up, however it's built? Does that make sense? So then we can automatically get that information to them. And it's not like if you get a flyer, you get an email. So just a thought.
Thank you. And it looks like we have a question or comment from board member John Hetz.
Yes, I was just hoping to kind of tease out some of the questions in the expanded scope a little bit, and not in a lot of detail, but just to suggest that I'm concerned that the dashboard will give the appearance of answers, but it needs to be paired with good research to go along with it. Because in a lot of cases, dashboards don't do a very good job of dealing with, multi-determined causes or multi-determined effects. They don't deal with collinearity well. They don't deal with confounds well. And so I think we need to make sure that it has a companion vehicle of research that's going along with this, because it may give the appearance of answers that may not be correct, given the level of specificity and complexity of the questions that the dashboard is being asked to answer.
I couldn't agree more with the three board members who have put questions and considerations on the table here. Without the data, we don't have the ability to see very deeply into what's happening with this workforce, and we need the data to begin to see where there may be patterns that inform us about the systems that we're operating to recruit, prepare, and retain our workforce. So getting the data and getting this proof of concept up and stood up, I think is the first most critical thing for all of us to do. But there are groups in the state that have already undertaken, and I think are going to be very excited by what having a new kind of set of data dashboards will help them do. The University of California and their Citaran work, for instance, has been looking directly at some of the questions that are presented here around patterns of employment, patterns of attrition and retention, patterns of mobility. The governor's proposed budget that for next year is looking at other questions like building the new personnel management assistance teams into our state infrastructure to help local school districts understand how these patterns are impacting their ability to retain a workforce, so we can maybe begin to get to root cause analyses that help us understand both what's happening and how we can intervene appropriately to maintain the workforce we need. So I couldn't agree more, Mr. Hetz, about the need for a research agenda to emerge alongside these data dashboards and to not rely overly on them without that additional research to help us understand what's really at the base of or causing, to the extent that we can know this, the patterns that may emerge.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that this is Jonathan again, and I kind of second what Patrick Perry put in the chat about outsourcing some of this to researchers. And to follow up on what Mary said, yeah, we've been working, CTC and CDE have been working with Sateran, but we've also, both of our parties have also been working with researchers out of the Learning Policy Institute, LPI, on very similar but unrelated questions around teacher mobility and retention. We're working with other partners that, researchers from UCs, CSUs, other institutions. So I concurred that there's probably a space for both of these things. But John, I do agree with you that maybe the dashboard itself should have some caveats, right? Like what can and can't we do, right? And then there's a space still for researchers to complement that. So I think that's a really great suggestion.
Maybe just to weigh in quickly on all of these comments, thank you so much both for the question and just to clarify what was in the chat as well. The C2C office won't be doing its own research and analysis on this. Our goal is to make information available. So a few quick reactions. I think you're highlighting the importance when we create the dashboards of being very clear through user testing and how we design the dashboards, that it's clear what the information presented in the dashboard does and doesn't say. And then the analytical data system of which this will be a part enables researchers outside of CTC, right? The independent researchers to do the analysis that can inform these questions as well. So I just want to speak quickly to that and thank you for the question.
Yeah, and just to be honest, one of the concerns I know that several ed prep programs have about making some of this data publicly available is there are a lot of contextual differences from one university or one CSU campus to another, like different employment rates in the region or different feeder schools in an urban area versus a rural area. And these contextual factors are pretty important in a lot of the sheer quantitative numbers that you're going to see in a dashboard. So both the dashboard needs to really be clear about the limitations of the data, and any research that's done really needs to take into account the contextual factors.
Thank you so much for those comments and a lot of great suggestions and feedback there. All right, so the next item on our agenda today, seeing that we don't have any more questions for board members, the next agenda item is our advisory board member application process. So the Cradle-to-Career board has 2 advisory boards. Next slide, please. The Data and Tools Advisory Board and the Community Engagement Advisory Board. The Data and Tools Advisory Board ensures that the data and tools provide actionable information for the Cradle-to-Career system. Their work will include looking at data points, public-facing tools, and then priority topics for research. So a lot of the discussion that we just had here. The Community Engagement Advisory Board ensures that there's strong feedback loops with data users to support evidence-based decision-making, increased analytical capacity, and equitable access to actionable information. So their work will include, for example, recommending professional development and technical assistance models, as well as communication strategies to ensure that a broad range of Californians know about and are using the tools of the data system. Each advisory board will have 16 members. Sorry, taking notes here. Because it is important for us to cultivate a diversity of perspectives, we want to be inclusive of a diversity of voices and lived experiences, and to recruit members who have expertise in equity. And I believe a structured application approach will be helpful in surfacing the strengths of individuals who come forward, would like to serve on the advisory boards, and it is a time commitment. The application process will include a written application with a series of questions that can be scored against a rubric. The scoring rubric will then help us select members who have diverse experiences and relevant expertise. So we want to, sort of build the right team. I will work alongside the Cradle-to-Career team and Westside staff to do an initial review of these applications. And I actually like to know if our board members would like to create an ad hoc committee to review the slate of candidates before it goes to vote before the entire board. So if you're board member, please chat yes if that's something that you would be interested in. If you're personally interested in being part of this ad hoc committee, please go ahead and chat Sydney if you'd like to be part of that ad hoc committee. I'm not seeing a lot of interest in creating an ad hoc committee to look at oh, here we go. Perhaps I went through that a little bit quickly. I'll try to speak a little bit slower. Okay, great. I think that we might have some volunteers in this group. So thank you. Of course, we're planning to circulate this information as widely as possible. The application will be posted in public forums, such as the Cradle-to-Career website and Screen Door, I think it is, with a 2-week sort of deadline in that process. Our board members can refer potential candidates, work that network in order to apply for the advisory boards. And obviously, if we have more applicants than available advisory board seats, the Cradle-to-Career team will, like I said, assist with the scoring of those applications against the rubric, and the ad hoc committee will do their review. And then finally, I will go ahead and present the slate of candidates for each advisory board to our Cradle-to-Career full governing board at a future meeting for approval. Are there any questions about this particular process or approach?
Quick question, what time frame are we looking at?
Sydney, can I call on you? How quickly do we think that we'll have our questions together, or the application form?
So right now we don't have a set time frame, just because we were busy onboarding everyone and onboarding Marianne as well. So we don't have a defined timeline, and we wanted to make sure that this process worked before we move forward with it. So within the next couple of weeks, we'll release more information about an actual timeline for you.
Just to add briefly to that, I think the hope would be that if the process moves smoothly along, that we can have that slate of advisory board members ready for a vote before the next meeting.
Thank you. And so hearing no additional questions.
Sylvia has her hand raised.
Sorry, I have my hand up.
Sorry, go ahead, Sylvia. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
That's okay. My question is really one to try to seek a little more information about this concept of the advisory board. Is it a single board, or is it multiple boards that are constituted based on the specialized knowledge or expertise or the project that we envision they would be advising us on? So I look at item number 1, and it says plural. And in my mind, I was thinking a single board. Help me here, because I think about this teacher ed dashboard. The people I would want to see advising us on that would be different if the subject content were something else. So I would find it a little more helpful to understand who I might invite to participate in forwarding their names to this opportunity.
Certainly. So the 2 advisory boards are part of the recommendations that came out of the planning work group, and it's codified in legislation. So the legislation that establishes Cradle-to-Career sets forth a number of requirements, and the ability for the governing board to establish these 2 separate advisory boards was really distinct sort of areas of focus. So the data and tools is really focused on that side of things, data points, the tools themselves, the dashboards, public facing tools, whereas the community engagement piece is really looking at this component of increasing the usability, the use of the tools through professional learning, professional development types of activities, and of course, community outreach. Does that help?
Very helpful. Thank you. I didn't make that distinction, but now that I'm looking at my draft governance manual, there it is. So thank you so much for helping me connect the dots.
Certainly. You don't want to miss any other board members.
Amy, can I jump in? This is Marisol.
Certainly, Marisol.
So I think just back to Sylvia's point, and just a quick question. Are we limited to those two advisory boards or bodies? Or do we have flexibility to create other venues for input? And why I'm asking this is just going back to that first presentation that we had, where just having that student voice was just extremely valuable. And so I don't know if that shows up within the two advisory boards that we are considering that are required by the statute. So just kind of wondering if we have other opportunities, other flexibilities that we may want to consider going forward.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have flexibility in creating additional ad hoc committees. And I do think that it would be really helpful if in creating ad hoc committees, they were very focused and in terms of scope, their duties, what they are tasked to do and so forth. Let me see if we have some additional questions here. Will people who've already submitted an expression of interest be notified when the application becomes available? And I actually will need to defer to the Cradle-to-Career team on that one.
Yes, so we have a list of those who've already expressed interest via the website, and we will be sending an email to those once the applications are available. Thank you.
Is there also a way to disseminate this opportunity to the hundreds of people who were involved in setting this concept up? I think those are people who have demonstrated their understanding and commitment to this work, and either they or someone they know may be interested in this advisory function. So if at all possible, I think that would be a fantastic way to recruit some committed and interested participants.
Yes, thank you for that. We have both the formal mechanisms through the website, but we're also working very closely with the WestEd team that facilitated the planning process. So should be able to have both contact information for people who had been engaged directly and also reaching out to people who've served as ambassadors to different communities throughout the planning process. Thank you.
All right, and I see that there was a question about the time commitment. And so these are volunteers. And, I think that I don't have a good answer. I will be completely honest with you on the time commitment that is needed. I imagine that they will need to convene, meet regularly in order to discuss matters in front of them. So for example, when we talk about the research agenda, and is that are we serving the needs of the public, of researchers, and in an equitable fashion? Are we looking at the types of research requests that are being denied? For example, there might be some really meaty work that needs to be done in these advisory boards. And so I think the time commitment will depend on the body of work ahead. Okay, so I'm not seeing any further questions from our board members. So I think what we'll do is we will go ahead and proceed to our next agenda item, which is lunch. Lunch is scheduled for 30 minutes. So we will see you back at about 12:31. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that everyone was able to grab a quick bite to eat, have a good break, maybe stretch your legs, something like that. The next item on our agenda today is the governance manual. I actually think it was quite timely, Sylvia's aha moment earlier when she was able to reference the information about the advisory boards from the governance manual. If it were not for lunch, it would have made just the perfect segue, I think. But this particular item, the governance manual, is important to me, not just as the current board chair, but also think about it in the context of, future board members and future chairs. I think that when we first engage in some really complex, maybe difficult work, and of course, the intent is always to build strong relationships to support the work. It's often helpful to have really a shared understanding about what is expected of us in our roles. And from the chat earlier, about the advisory board, volunteers, we saw some of that, wanting to clarify, expectations. And I think that, early in my career, I saw kind of what happened when a group of individuals, we came together for this really intense, high-profile project. But not everybody came from kind of the same shared experience. And so some people had these expectations for others in the group that really they were kind of left unsaid and hidden. And, while we were all moving really fast, I think, obviously with the best intent, I think that, that kind of disconnect really caused a big strain because you start to take things, maybe personally, or even when you think that you've put your whole self and all this time, all this energy into it, and so we were all moving so fast, but it just, we had this feeling that maybe we weren't as productive and as efficient as we could have been, and I think that kind of thing leads to burnout. It leads to poor morale on a team, and so. As we are all here in our respective capacities to serve Californians and to build this historic and consequential data system, I think how we work together is a really important consideration. And so as we transition from the C2C work group planning process into our board's, operations, I believe that a governance manual can be very helpful in moving forward with the recommendations from the planning process. It could be also very foundational in building a healthy board culture, one in which the best intentions are supported by clear and open expectations that are written down, and everybody can look at it. The legislation actually supports, expects, and supports this, the supporting and developing and the updating of the governance manual is actually one of the responsibilities that's in Ed Code for the managing entity. And I want to make sure I get this right. It's in Ed Code section 10867 B1B. And so with that, I'd like for us to invite Kathy to start off with some background and really to catch us up with where we are at with the current version of the manual, which is dated February 10th.
Thanks, Amy. So for those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Kathy Booth and I work with WestEd, and I was the process facilitator during the 18-month planning process that led up to the creation of the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. So what I wanted to do was start up by just explaining why we have a board manual at all, in addition to the fact that it's named in statute, as Amy mentioned. So there's this concept called data governance, which when I was first getting started in this work, I found very confusing because it seemed to encompass everything, from the concept of having a governing board structure and what the roles and responsibilities of people on those various boards and committees would be, but also really super technical things like how do you suppress records so that you couldn't from the dashboard figure out the identity of people whose information is being represented. And so because data governance is sort of big and small all at once. There's a number of different types of documents that states normally create to sort of establish those rules of the road. So what I've put in front of you on the slide is sort of a continuum of different types of documents that you generally find and that we're trying to build here for Cradle to Career. And the difference between them is how binding they are, whether they're sharing a set of norms or if they're getting into something that you sort of have to do. So a board manual is all the way over on the left because it's the thing that is non-binding. And generally, board manuals are constantly evolving. So one of the things that we did during the planning process is we actually went to other states and we looked at the types of documentations that they created. And the board manual that you see is actually based on several existing states' similar documents. So the idea is that you create this and then you keep going back to it because it's establishing the norms of engagement between the board members and then the other entities they're working closely with, like the staff at the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data, as well as the advisory boards. So that's something that you would continue to adjust. One of the things that's really important to note is that during the planning process, we got partway through creating what should be in this manual, but we didn't nail everything down. So there's a bunch of things like clarifying who's taking the notes and where they get posted and things like that didn't get talked about by the work group. And that's why you don't see it yet in the manual. And it's one of the reasons why Amy really wanted to convene that ad hoc committee that would go in and fill in the things that didn't get thought through or established during the planning process. So that's the board manual. Then you get to things like models. And this is basically a summary of the way you want something to function. So early on in the planning process, we created a document called the legal and technical model, and you can actually go to the planning website and can take a look at this. And it's where we were really sorting through because we knew we had to blend together educational and health data, which have different rules about who can access it and how you delegate authority. So we're sort of laying out the implications for both the technical infrastructure and the legal agreements and things like that. So we started to get a little bit more granular about process for the development of the system. And then that led to things that are extremely technical, like policies. So one of the things that the legal subcommittee did is they worked on an opt-out policy that basically says, if you are a person, if you are a student who's saying, wait a second, I don't think I want my data in this data system, the formal process you would follow to be able to opt out. So there's a whole slew of policies that got developed during the planning process that the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data will work with and probably continue to work with ad hoc committees to amend, based especially as technology evolves. Then you get to legal documents. So you've heard a couple of times so far a reference to a participation agreement, which is referenced in statute, and it's going to be the document that clarifies how the managing entity, which is the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data, is going to work with the data providers, so those would be things like state agencies, for how the sensitive individual level data gets handled. So we make sure that we keep it safe and that we're following the regulations that are set by the federal government and the state. And then the most binding document is the legislation. And so California in AB 132 created a very, very specific set of rules about what everyone is supposed to be doing. And really, one of the reasons why we think that California has a model that is going to be an exemplar to the nation is that you've attended to, or the planning group attended to, all these different concepts along the way. And so you're going to be in really good stead for having the right type of documents for the right kind of decisions. So we wouldn't want to pass statute that has to do with highly specific things about the way you create an ad hoc committee, because that might change over time. And so that's one of the ways that you can think about this. But this is all still fairly technical. And so one of the things that I did is I went back to one of the people that helped us out during the planning process. His name is Sean Cottrell, and he used to work for the entity that the federal government uses to support states when they're developing data systems. And he gave me an analogy. And what he said is a governance manual is like a car manual. So it's how you figure out, where do you look on your dashboard to figure out how fast you're going? And if for some reason it's set for the metric system, how you can make it work so that you can see it in miles per hour. But a car manual does not set the speed limit. And that's very important as you're thinking about this governance manual. And so these things are going to be a little bit different. We might have things like bylaws that you would choose to create down the road, but really nothing in the governance manual is binding, but it really is helpful to make the process go well. So what I wanted to do is to here's the process for developing the manual. So if you're curious about where this all came from, it's important to note that almost all of the content came right out of the planning process. So in essence, this document is bridging the hard work that more than 200 people did over an 18-month process to be able to identify how the data system should function, and particularly the relationship between the governing board, advisory boards, and the managing entity. So this is your chance to sort of, enshrine those ideas into your own processes. So if you spend a lot of time very carefully looking at what's showing up in the governance manual versus what was in some of the original ideas that were crafted by the work group, you will notice some changes. So for example, there were some timeline issues that got shifted. There were some aspects of the legislation that were different than the planning process. For example, the governing board structure is different than what the work group recommended. And so we went through and just made sure that we lined everything up with the legislation and with subsequent decisions so that we were really reflecting the current state of play. A lot of that was going back to legislation. And then also we had an important conversation with the legal counsel at the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data and GovOps, the Government Operations Agency, about what needed to be in there about Bagley-Keene. So one of the things that's repeatedly referenced in the legislation is that we are all subject to the Bagley-Keene rules, which, for those of you who don't know these obscure laws, basically is the process by which the public is made aware of your deliberations as part of the governing board. The idea is that this is a data system for the people of California, and so they need to know what's going on when you're having discussions. And there's a lot of technicalities about how that statute gets implemented in your own communications with each other. And so there was a desire to make sure that you really understood what you were responsible for related to that. So I think that that's sort of the basic background that we wanted to give you about the structure of this. There is one thing to note: if you had careful readers, and if you took the version of this that we put out before the November board meeting against the one today, there are some slight adjustments. And a lot of that was actually your board chair, Amy Fong, going in and saying, wait, you know what, if I were reading this for the first time, the order of this is really confusing. And so she made a number of minor adjustments that don't change the content, but hopefully make the board manual a little bit easier to read. And then I don't know if Marianne, you wanted to sort of chime in about the decision about the timeline.
Sure. So one thing that we did is also the removal of kind of an implementation timeline for the activities of C2C. That implementation timeline had been developed during the planning phase, before the governing board had been seated and before the executive director recruitment and selection had happened. And now we in the C2C office will now develop timelines, proposed timelines that build off of the planning process timeline, but take into account some of the nuances now that we're starting implementation. And also just wanted to mention the implementation statute for C2C also gives you and the board the purview to adopt a timeline for the development of C2C's work. So we, from the staff side, didn't want to kind of get ahead of that process. So that's part of the reason why the implementation timeline is not in the current version of the document.
Great, thank you, Marianne and Kathy. So as Kathy mentioned, one of the things I did was I took a look at the flow of the document, and I want to say this was maybe December, January timeframe, something like that. And so what I did was I consolidated the information around each of the entities so that the information about the board was kind of in one spot. When it had a section of its own, the managing entity section of its own, data provider section of its own, and so forth. And as I did so, I came to think about, how could this document better serve each of these groups? As a board member, I wondered about, the process of onboarding members, and obviously as a chair, what's my responsibilities on that? I was also thinking about whether more information about the process and the timing for nominating board chairs, and what would be the specific duties of that incoming chair on your, midway through that 2-year term. That was of interest to me. I also thought about, whether it would be helpful for board members if we had set standards or protocols around, for example, handling media requests in addition to just, general communication, so that we stay within Bagley-Keene. I know for some of you, some of the board members I've talked to do have expectations that the board chair and the executive director are included in all communications between board members, but I know that this is not a universal expectation. And so again, going with this, expectations that might be unseen or unheard can cause us to stumble, right? And then operationally, well, I think that Bagley-Keene sets a lot of requirements around open meetings. Some board members may like to have written down some guidance around, scheduling meetings, whether they're virtual, in person, the timing, the duration. So far, we've had 1 day or shorter meetings, but what if there's a need for, longer or special meetings? For much of the work around meeting coordination, Sydney, our board liaison, has taken on these responsibilities. But perhaps it would be helpful to kind of identify specific roles, responsibilities, and those kinds of things. So that said, in the end, I felt that what we have currently is really a great start in that, like Kathy said, it affirms the recommendations from the planning process. And I believe we have room to collaborate, to work on this together, and to improve how the governance manual serves each of the parties, each of how we engage in this work. So, I think to just to recap, what we're the strategy, the approach here is to treat this governance manual as within a living document sort of framework, so that we have that ad hoc committee that can take a look at and work on additional topics, refine or evolve, existing content, add the new content that I mentioned, and maybe some of you all have some content that you think ought to be added. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. This sort of brings us to a discussion on the manual and the discussion questions that are on this slide. So first of all, if our board members know of additional topics, I'd love for you to just use the chat so we can document them for our ad hoc committee to address. We'll have, Sydney note these in the minutes so we can keep track of them as well. I see that Chris has his hand up. So Chris.
Yes, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Kathy. I just wanted to put a plug in for some more detail around how the board member will take on any additional necessary expertise to discharge its responsibilities. There's a provision in there for ad hoc advisory boards in addition to the 2 permanent advisory boards we just discussed. But given there's likely to be a need for additional expertise beyond those 2 advisory boards, to have some more detail about how the ad hoc advisory boards committees are formed and how additional expertise is taken on board. But in general, I do agree that the scaffolding of the governance manual provided by the planning process is a solid one, but that there is a need for a lot more detail. And I appreciate you bringing this up and starting to work on that.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have other board members who have additional clarifying questions? Sylvia.
I appreciate Chris bringing up the ad hoc groups. I think that they become, a very important way to test and ensure that what's being collected is got the grounding and the understanding of how it would be used to the betterment of people who have a lot of interest in a given area. So wanted to add my endorsement there as well. The other issue that I think comes up here is research-related uses for the data, right? At universities, colleges, we have IRB committees, we have groups that look at, what is the intended need or purpose that a research may have, and ensuring that it's used responsibly, ethically. I think that that appears to be missing. Maybe it's too early, but I'd like to put a placeholder and really asking, how do we ensure that the data is used responsibly for research-related purposes?
I can actually speak to that. There was, going back to that idea of a continuum, there was a very detailed process that was developed for how data requests would be handled that spoke to a lot of those exact questions. Those are available on the planning website, and in a second I'll make a link to where those are. But that might be a place where, if upon looking at this, there was a desire to dig in a little bit further, that would be something that you could recommend to the staff.
Right, and I see we have a question from board member Jerry Winkler about quorum. So I'm going to actually ask Ron Marriott, our counsel, to address that.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. Yes, I see the question. I didn't read the draft manual to imply what was asked in the question. Oh, I see. Yes. At the moment, of course, we're under pandemic relaxations of open meeting rules and requirements. But yes, in this draft version, it would be under the standard pre-pandemic expectations that would not count towards a quorum. I will note that the executive order that's currently relaxed, the in-person requirements, expires at the end of March. There are some rumblings that the legislature might enact something that would continue a liberalization of the in-person rules. But at the moment, we're in a little bit of a gray area with the pending lapse of the executive order and the understanding that we go back to pre-pandemic open meeting rules. Does that answer your question, member? I'm sorry, was that Winkler that asked the question?
Yeah, that was me. And as a follow-up, it states that 14 members are required to establish a quorum, and as well as 14 members are required to pass any motions. Is that correct?
The statute requires that the board adopt a method of taking decisions that require a 2/3 vote, which would be 14. A quorum would be just more than half. A quorum would be 11 members of the current 21 members.
But according to the statute, it says a quorum of the membership, not attending, but membership. I just want to clarify that's what we're talking about.
Well, a quorum is the term for having a meeting. Decision-making is the 2/3 vote that's specified in 10.865A5. And I'm sorry if I'm not directly answering your question, but there's a difference between a quorum and the threshold for decision-making that's required by statute.
So you're stating that 10.865A5 states that states that 2/3 of the voting membership to concur in the decision. So it's not a quorum that's required, but an actual 2/3 of the voting membership. So 14 members must agree and vote for any decisions. Is that correct?
That's how I interpret the statute, yes.
And in order to establish a quorum, 14 members have to be present?
No, a meeting will fulfill the quorum requirements and can proceed on a meeting basis with a majority of the membership. So under the current 21-member board, 11 is required to have a quorum for a meeting. However, if there are only 11, it would be not possible to satisfy the 14-member vote to take action, but the meeting could proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's tough. um, okay, I'm just kind of scanning to see if we have any raised hands. And so I'd like to get a sense, how do we feel about, this particular version of the governance manual? Is this something that we would like to contemplate a vote on, or are there specific areas where we'd like to do some live edits here in order for us to be able to contemplate a vote? And I see Alejandra has come forward with a question or comment.
Yeah, thank you. I have some questions about the about like data requests and what that looks like for the managing entity. It's been brought to my attention that this wasn't entirely mapped out in the document. So I don't know if this is a conversation that has happened before, if this may be the space to have that now, but just bringing up the questions of how long does the managing entity have to respond to request? Do they have to provide any justification for denied requests? Are pending requests posted somewhere? So generally questions about transparency regarding requests for data for research.
I'm going to call on Kathy to help us out with that one.
Absolutely. So the two links that I put up in the chat are where you're going to find this information. So there's a very carefully scripted process that will be used, but if we're going to just sort of summarize it. So let's say I'm representing WestEd as a research organization, which we are, and I want to do a study looking at something that involves people in multiple different segments of the educational system and how that relates to employment data. So I would go to a website and I would fill out an application that basically indicates what I'm looking for. And that would go to the managing entity. And the managing entity would take a look at it. And maybe they'd say back to me, Kathy, this is a great question. Lucky for you, it's actually answerable on the query tool. So you don't even have to request it. You can just go and here's where you go and you get the answer to that question. Or if they say, okay, this is not something that can be answered in the publicly available data, they take a look at the way I've described it. One of the things that we did is we talked with the people who actually approve research requests. And one of the biggest problems they have is really unclear questions or people picking the wrong data elements. So the managing entity takes a first pass and maybe works with that requester saying, Kathy, we're really unclear what it is you're actually trying to figure out and why you're asking for this data point when it's not related to your research questions. So they do the work to just get it sort of cleaned up. And then they send it just to the data providers that are included in the request. And they can say, okay, this is what's being asked of you. And then an expert within each agency takes a look and does that double verification. Is this a question that really is going to be answerable with the data points that have been requested? They can take a look at the requester in the context and sort of figure out if it fits the definition of fulfilling the public good, which is laid out in statute. And then they work with the managing entity as an intermediary to make sure that the research request questions are really going to answer the right thing. And then once it's approved, it goes to the Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects, which serves as the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. They are already pre-approved for most very sensitive federal related projects, so we can be assured that we're really following a rigorous process. And then that would lead into information going into an agreement, a legal agreement between the requester, the data provider, and GovOps, sorry, the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. And then information would be released into a secure data enclave. And I would go into it and I would manipulate the data in that enclave. I can't take it away and do anything with it. And then the agencies review what I'm removing before it gets to come out. And all along the way, the requests are immediately noted in a public website. So you can see, oh, Kathy Booth requested this type of information for this research question on this date. And then you can look and see, is somebody dragging out the process, taking a ridiculously long period of time? And then if I get denied, they have to say why. So they can't just be like, oh, we don't like Kathy. They'd have to say, this question is actually, like whatever the rationale is, but that makes it clear that it's not in the public good. And then the final check on the process is that the Data and Tools Advisory Board is going to look at all of the requests that were denied every year, and they're going to look for patterns. Maybe there's a problem with the process that makes it really difficult to get it through. Maybe someone's really reluctant to share data, and we can work with them and figure out why, and figure out a way to make it more accessible. So that's the process. And that's why there has to be 2 documents, because it's very involved.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right, and I see we have a question or a comment from board member Gavin Payne.
Hi, so this goes to your last point on whether it's ready or sufficient to approve. My sense is yes, and I'll explain why I think we should go forward and approve that. because I think we have a number, some of us and a lot of us have a number of questions about sort of processes and activities. But my sense is, in order for Marianne and company to sort of get the work moving forward, they need a fundamental document that has been signed off on by the board that is sort of overseeing this activity. And my sense is that it's imperative for us to move fast in improving this, knowing that we want to have some time to have some experience with it and get ourselves to a place where we can sort of make the right changes as we go forward, and the right changes to the manual itself and or changes in terms of the structure going forward, in terms of the entirety of our operation. My sense is it's always better to have something to work off of than it is to sort of try to create whole as we're going. And the staff, especially as you know, they're sort of rushing to get a lot of things done, needs something that is their fundament that sort of sets their guidelines going forward. There's such a rich amount of information in this around the process that we all followed, or those of us who were in the development process followed, that I think needs to be enshrined and given official board imprimatur to sort of get that on the books, as it were, for us to be able to move forward. And so my inclination is to definitely move forward and to have a vote and to go from there. And I'll be the first to volunteer for any ad hoc committee that's ready to address issues that are in the manual itself.
Thanks, Gavin. Do you need to get a sense of the temperature of the room? Do we have, you know, are there sticky sessions that we want to open up the manual and do some quick live edits before we think about moving to a vote? Do we want to do a little bit more discussion here? How are we feeling? Are we feeling that this is a good place for us to start as a living document?
Can I bring up one more thing, Amy, please?
Certainly, Alejandra, go ahead.
On page 33, it says that all data providers have one seat each on the governing board. Was that intended to mean that each new data provider is automatically added to the governing board? Or is there more of a process there? Because the way that it reads to me right now is that that's an automatic inclusion in the governing board.
And there was quite a bit of discussion around, you know, how do we ensure that this, you know, the governing board really represents the data providers. And I think that Kathy may have some additional background that she can share with us from the planning process.
So one of the things that did not get determined during the planning process was how additional entities might be added. So to give you a really tangible example, a lot of other states would include the Department of Justice because they're looking at justice-involved youth or the difference between what happens if you've served time or not. And so there might be a point in the future when Cradle-to-Career will want to include that data set, but we didn't actually map out what that process was going to be. So the statute points to the idea that it is up to the governing board to determine what that process is going to be. And that's why it isn't fully spelled out yet in the manual.
Just checking to see if we have any additional comments, thoughts.
I had one question. Kathy, you mentioned that you checked on other states and this, you followed what other states had done in the way of governance manuals. This seems more like guidelines and reference material to me. Is this an actual manual?
Yep.
And is that what we want to call it?
So there's two reasons why we use the term manual. One is that we saw that frequently in the way a similar non-binding document was described in other states. And in fact, Leanne Fong-Batkin, who was instrumental in the planning process, was actually working out of another state's manual and slotting in the relevant information. So this is heavily prototyped based on something that is in use in other states. But we also use the term because it's referenced in statute. It says that one of the responsibilities of the managing entity is to create and edit a governance manual. And so we're just using the legislative language. But it is non-binding and it is all process, and that's what it's supposed to be. So one of the things to note about the very important concerns that were raised about, well, what is the data request process and where is that enshrined? That belongs as a policy. That should not be in the governance manual. So again, you're going to have lots of different types of documents for different purposes. And the way that you figure out what belongs where is how binding is this? So you might in fact decide you don't want to have a governance manual non-binding process for how you amend the governing board. You may want to actually create a formal policy that says at the point that we want to invite another state agency to participate, this is the specific process we're going to follow. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great, checking once again to see if we have additional questions. So I'd like to go ahead and thank you all for the discussion and input. I think it definitely helps to clarify, because as we all are coming from different backgrounds, different processes, or different agencies have their unique operations and characteristics. It's important for us to be able to come together and collaborate. So let me just go ahead and cover for everyone the process for voting. The process would be for me to ask for a motion and a second, and board members would chat yes if they approve, yes with reservations if they have concerns that they would like on the record, no if they do not approve. Sydney will help us tally the votes, and anyone who voted yes with reservations, no, or abstain will have the opportunity to voice the rationale for the group, and Sydney will help to ensure that those items are noted in the minutes. So for where we're at in the meeting, we have this draft motion that is here on the screen. And I would love to ask either for a motion for this, or if we have some edits that we would like to make.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Gavin. Do we have a second?
This is Tom, my second.
Thank you, Tom. So at this time, I'd like to call for a vote. So board members, please add your vote to the chat. This would be yes, yes with reservations, no, or abstain. So again, if you're voting yes with reservations, no, or abstain, be sure to include your rationale in the comments so that we can add that to the minutes. I was counting and I was like, we're one short. It's me. Okay, I think, Sydney, you're the official tallier. Do we have everyone's votes in?
Yes, I believe so. We have 16 yeses and 2 yeses with reservations. I do not see any no's in the chat.
Thank you. So of course, I'd like to call on Sylvia and then followed up with Jerry so that they can express their rationale for the minutes. Sylvia?
So I think this is a well-written document. It is a living, working document, and I would like to see us put some time parameters with it behind it so that we commit to revisiting it as this organization matures and we learn what was working in the manual and where there are opportunities to refine it. So the absence of a time parameter is a reservation. The other has to do with data providers defining what that is. And I'll give you an example. Today we had a conversation on the teacher preparation dashboard. There was a letter of support from a director that is 4 levels below my role in the function that he plays, an important function, but it's 4 levels below my own role, 5 beyond the chancellors. And so I think we have to clarify kind of authorities and responsibilities for ensuring that data is shared responsibly, and that whoever is transmitting it is aware of the responsibility that they have to ensure that it's both accurate and ethically transmitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I was just taking notes for my copy here. And Jerry?
My reservations are just along the lines of being a little more clear on much of the document. As Sylvia stated, there are things in here that are, and I understand it's a living document, but being clear that it's non-binding at this point, and that we are going to set some policies and procedures up that will be in fact policies and procedures. Those are my reservations.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, and we have a raised hand from Christopher Hewley.
Yes, thank you, Amy. I'm supportive of adopting the governance manual as a starting point, with the understanding it's a living, breathing document. Just a quick check on language of this statement, though. A living document and will be modified on an ongoing basis makes it almost sound like it's going to be a constantly moving target. So maybe something like may be modified at any time, something like that, or maybe modified as necessary.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and flag that verbiage for the ad hoc committee to fine tune. All right, so with that said, I believe the motion passes. Thank you for that. So the next and final item on our agenda today is the conflict of interest policy, which I believe is very straightforward and boilerplate. So I'm not going to read it or try to explain it. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and just open it up for questions, and Ron Marriott, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer for the Office of Cradle-to-Career, can help address any questions that you might have about the conflict of interest policy. So I'd invite board members to go ahead and step up if they have questions.
Madam Chair, would you like me to make 60 seconds worth of a preamble?
Oh, I'd love for you to go ahead and speak to it, Ron. Thank you.
I think what Amy said is correct, that perhaps this is ready for a vote. But for those of you who are new to state government and have not seen this type of thing before, the language in this document, which will be familiar to those in state government, tracks almost exactly the recommended language from the Fair Political Practices Commission, and is available on their website. What's unique or different about this policy versus some other agency is Appendix A, which has the list of positions and the disclosure categories. And with that, perhaps I've said enough, but happy to take questions.
Okay, everybody's still with us, hopefully. I'm not seeing any questions on this. Thank you, Ron. So our process for this vote is the same as that we just used. So I'm going to go ahead and need a motion. A second, if this resolution that is before us is good to go. So do we need any edits on this particular resolution? All right, so do I have a motion?
I second the motion.
Okay, I think that was that Gavin and Sylvia. Perfect. Okay, thank you. And so this time I'd like to go ahead and call for votes. So board members, please add your vote to the chat. Same as before. Yes, yes with reservations, no, or abstain. So if you're voting yes with reservation, no, or abstain, be sure to include your rationale or comments so that we can add that to the minutes. And then Sydney, if you could let us know what our final tally is.
So far, we have 18 yeses and no nos and no yes with reservations. Looks like it's all yes votes. 19 yeses.
All right, and 19 is our total count?
Yes.
Okay, well, 14 is what's needed to achieve. So the motion carries. Thank you so much for participating in today's meeting. I think that we did have a really productive meeting today, lots of good discussions. We've reached the end of our scheduled agenda items. And so if there are no further objections, I would like to thank the governing board members and members of the public for their time and participation today. Sydney and Kathy, I'd just like to ask, do we have any action steps that will be taken between now and the next meeting? Any action items for us or for the Cradle-to-Career team potentially?
I think the main action item is going back and finalizing the advisory board member selection process. That will be the biggest one that we'll focus on. And then also there were a couple of follow-up points with possibly identifying ways to integrate independent colleges and CCGI single point of college application. And then also looking at identifying how the teacher dashboard could be used to identify individuals' eligibility for financial aid. So we have a couple of things that we're going to follow up about. And then of course, also the 2 potential ad hoc committees on the governance manual and the advisory board member selection. So a couple of things that we'll get started on after today.
All right, thank you for that recap. So, hearing no objections, I'd like to thank you once again for participating in the governing board meeting for the Office of Cradle-to-Career and adjourn this meeting. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks.